Before time began its endless march, before the first breath stirred the void, there existed only none, the infinite expanse of dark primordial waters that stretched beyond comprehension. These waters held no light, no form, no distinction between up and down, left and right. Within this absolute nothingness, consciousness stirred, not born, not created by another, but self-willed into existence came the first spark of divine awareness that would become Ra, the sun god whose radiance would illuminate all creation. The priests of Heliopolis, that ancient city sacred to the sun, preserved the most complete account of this cosmic birth. According to their sacred texts inscribed on temple walls and papyrus scrolls, Ra emerged through an act of supreme will and self-determination. The primordial waters of Nun could not contain or define him, for he was the antithesis of their chaotic formlessness. Where none represented infinite potential without direction, Ra embodied focused creative power with clear intent. The moment of Ra's self-creation defied mortal understanding. From the depths of Nun, a mound began to rise, not of earth or stone, but of crystallized divine essence. This was the Benben stone, a pyramidal formation that would later inspire the construction of countless monuments across Egypt. The Benben represented the first solid matter to emerge from the primordial chaos, serving as both Ra's birthplace and his eternal throne. Its surface gleamed with an inner light that had never before existed in the universe, for Ra brought illumination itself into being through his emergence. As Atum Ra, the self-created one, he stood upon this primordial mound with the bearing of absolute sovereignty. His form at this moment transcended physical description, for he embodied all possibilities of divine manifestation. The ancient texts describe him as both singular and multiple, complete yet ready to multiply, perfect in his solitude yet destined to populate the cosmos with his offspring. His body radiated the golden light that would become the sun, but this was not merely illumination, it was the fundamental force of creation itself, the energy that would transform the static waters of Nun into a dynamic universe filled with life and purpose. The act of creation that followed challenged the sensibilities of later civilizations, yet the Egyptians understood it as the most natural expression of divine power. Alone in the cosmos with no partner to assist in procreation, Ra took his phallus in his hand and through the sacred act of masturbation, released his creative essence into the void. This was not viewed as crude or improper, but as the ultimate expression of self-sufficiency and creative power. The god needed no external force, no feminine counterpart, no assistance from any other being to bring forth life. From this divine seed came forth Shu, the god of air and atmosphere. Shu emerged as a tall, lean figure whose very breath would separate the heavens from the earth. His skin held the pale blue-grey colour of the morning sky, and his hair flowed like wind currents around his noble head. Upon his shoulders rested the responsibility of holding apart the cosmic forces that would otherwise collapse back into primordial chaos. His muscles, though not bulky, possessed the endless strength required to maintain the space between sky and earth for all eternity. Some versions of the creation myth describe Ra's method differently. Instead of the act of self-gratification, the god spat forth his creations. His divine saliva, charged with the same creative power as his seed, took form as his first children. Whether through one method or the other, the result remained constant: the birth of Shu and his sister Tefnut, goddess of moisture and order. Tefnut manifested as a lioness-headed woman whose presence brought the first moisture to the universe. Her golden fur rippled with an inner light inherited from her father, and her eyes held the fierce intelligence of a predator combined with the nurturing wisdom of a mother. Water droplets constantly formed around her, not from perspiration but from her very essence, transforming the dry void into a realm where life could eventually flourish. Her breath carried humidity, her tears would become the first rains, and her blood would flow as the life-giving waters of the Nile. Together, Shu and Tefnut represented the fundamental forces necessary for existence, air to provide space and breath, moisture to enable growth and sustenance. They were the first dual principles to emerge from Ra's singular perfection, establishing the pattern of complementary opposites that would define Egyptian theology for millennia to come. The creation of his children marked Ra's first transformation in an eternal cycle that would define his nature throughout all time. As Khepri, the scarab beetle, he represented the morning sun and the principle of becoming. The sacred beetle, which the Egyptians observed rolling balls of dung across the ground, became the perfect symbol for Ra's role in pushing the sun across the sky. Khepri's appearance combined the industrious nature of the beetle with divine magnificence. His carapace gleamed like polished obsidian, his 6 legs moved with purposeful precision, and his compound eyes reflected the first rays of dawn in countless facets. As the day progressed and the sun reached its zenith, Khepri transformed into Ra proper, the fully manifested sun god in his prime. This midday form blazed with such intensity that mortals could not look upon him directly. His human-like body, perfectly proportioned and radiating golden light, wore the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt even before those kingdoms existed, for Ra's sovereignty transcended earthly boundaries. The solar disk that crowned his head cast rays that penetrated every corner of creation, bringing life, growth, and the possibility of civilization. When evening approached and the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Ra underwent his final daily transformation into Atum, the setting sun and the principle of completion. Atum appeared as an elderly man whose wisdom encompassed all knowledge gained throughout the day's journey. His beard, long and perfectly groomed, held streaks of silver that caught the last light of dusk. Though aged in appearance, his eyes burned with undiminished power, for Atum represented not weakness or decline, but the fulfillment of purpose and the promise of renewal. This threefold nature, Khepri, Ra, and Atum, established the fundamental rhythm of existence. Each transformation demonstrated that change was not loss but renewal, that endings were merely preparations for new beginnings. The cycle would repeat endlessly, ensuring that creation remained dynamic rather than static, alive rather than merely existent. With Shu and Tefnut established as the first generation of his divine offspring, Ra set in motion the great work of cosmic organization. The primordial mound from which he had emerged became the foundation for all subsequent creation. From this first solid matter, the earth itself would eventually take shape. The Benben stone remained at the centre of this emerging world, serving as the axis around which all creation would revolve. Shu's primary task became the separation of heaven and earth. Using his powerful arms and endless breath, he lifted the sky goddess Nut, who would later be born from his union with Tefnut, above the earth god Geb, creating the space necessary for life to develop. This act required constant vigilance and strength, for the natural tendency of the cosmos was to collapse back into the undifferentiated unity of Nun. Only through Shu's perpetual effort could the ordered universe maintain its structure. Tefnut's role proved equally crucial. Her moisture enabled the transformation of the dry, lifeless mound into fertile ground capable of supporting vegetation and eventually more complex forms of life. She worked in harmony with her brother, his air currents distributing her life-giving waters throughout the emerging world. Together they established the basic conditions necessary for the elaborate creation that would follow. Ra's establishment of the first mound represented more than just the creation of solid matter. It marked the introduction of order into chaos, meaning into meaninglessness, purpose into random existence. The mound served as both foundation and symbol, the physical base upon which all subsequent creation would rest, and the conceptual principle that divine will could impose structure upon formless potential. The separation of heaven and earth through Ra's offspring created the fundamental architecture of reality. No longer would all things exist in the undifferentiated unity of the primordial waters. Instead, distinct realms emerged, the celestial sphere where the gods would dwell and conduct their cosmic duties, the terrestrial plane where mortal life would eventually flourish, and the underworld where the dead would journey and where Ra himself would travel each night to ensure the continuation of the cosmic cycle. This architectural division of reality established the framework within which all subsequent Egyptian mythology would unfold. The heavens became the realm of divine action, where cosmic dramas would play out with consequences for all creation. The earth became the stage for mortal existence, blessed by divine attention but also subject to divine judgment. The underworld became the realm of transformation and renewal, where the apparent finality of death revealed itself as merely another phase in the eternal cycle of existence. Ra's emergence from none and his subsequent acts of creation established him as the supreme deity of the Egyptian pantheon. Unlike gods in other mythological systems, who might be born from pre-existing parents or emerge through cosmic accidents, Ra created himself through pure will and then proceeded to create everything else through his own power and essence. This self-sufficiency and creative primacy would define his role throughout Egyptian history, making him the ultimate source of all divine authority and the final arbiter of cosmic order. The sacred nature of Ra's creative acts extended beyond their immediate results to establish principles that would govern Egyptian religious thought for thousands of years. The idea that creation required both will and substance, that divine power could transform itself into multiple forms while maintaining essential unity, and that the cosmos operated according to cycles of renewal rather than linear progression. All of these concepts traced their origins to Ra's first moments of existence and his initial acts of creation from the primordial mound in the endless waters of Nun. The creative power that flowed through Ra's initial offspring, Shu and Tefnut, carried within it the seeds of further divine generation. As the god of air embraced his sister, the goddess of moisture, their union represented the first marriage in creation, establishing the pattern of divine partnerships that would populate the heavens with an entire pantheon of deities. From their passionate coupling came forth two children whose very existence would fundamentally alter the structure of the cosmos. Geb, who would become the earth itself, and Nut, destined to arch above all creation as the star-spangled sky. Geb emerged from his parents' union as a powerful figure whose dark green skin rippled with the fertile potential of soil and growing things. His hair grew in thick, earthen locks that seemed to contain seeds and small plants, constantly sprouting new growth that withered and renewed in endless cycles. His muscular frame bore the weight of all terrestrial existence, from the smallest grain of sand to the mightiest mountain peak. When Geb laughed, the sound rumbled through the ground like distant earthquakes, and when he wept, his tears formed the underground springs that would nourish the roots of every plant that would ever grow. His sister Nut manifested as a woman of ethereal beauty, whose deep blue skin sparkled with countless points of light, the stars that would guide travellers and mark the passage of time. Her limbs possessed an impossible length and flexibility, allowing her to stretch across the entire expanse of heaven while touching the earth only with her fingertips and toes. Golden jewellery adorned her celestial form, each piece representing a constellation that would later guide Egyptian astronomers in their calculations. Her breath created the winds that carried clouds across the sky, and her voice produced the thunder that announced the coming of storms. The love between Geb and Nut blazed with an intensity that threatened the very stability of creation. Unlike the purposeful union of their parents, their passion burned with a wildness that acknowledged no boundaries or restraints. They embraced with such fervour that earth and sky pressed together, leaving no space for any other form of existence. Their bodies intertwined so completely that no light could penetrate between them, no air could circulate, no room remained for the life that Ra intended to populate his creation. This cosmic embrace created the first great crisis in the ordered universe that Ra had established. The separation between heaven and earth, so carefully maintained by Shu's constant effort, collapsed under the overwhelming attraction between his children. Where once there had been space for growth and development, now only the crushing weight of sky pressed against earth remained. The carefully balanced architecture of reality threatened to collapse back into the undifferentiated chaos of the primordial waters. Ra observed this cosmic catastrophe with growing alarm. His great work of creation, the ordered universe he had willed into existence through his own power, faced destruction not from external enemies, but from the uncontrolled passion of his own descendants. The very fertility he had built into the cosmic system threatened to overwhelm the structure necessary to contain and direct that creative force. Something had to be done, and done quickly, before the entire framework of existence collapsed under the weight of Geb and Nut's embrace. The sun god commanded Shu to separate his children by force. The god of air, strengthening his arms with all the power at his disposal, thrust himself between the lovers with tremendous effort. His muscles strained against their combined resistance as he slowly pried them apart, lifting Nut high above Geb's reaching arms. The separation required every ounce of Shu's divine strength, and even then he could barely maintain the gap between them. Nut's fingertips and toes remained in contact with Geb's body at the 4 cardinal points, creating the pillars that would forever support the sky above the earth. Geb's anguish at this enforced separation manifested in violent geological upheavals. His body convulsed with grief, creating the first mountains as his muscles tensed and relaxed. His tears carved the first river valleys, and his sighs opened the first caves deep within the earth. The god's pain transformed the previously smooth surface of the world into a landscape of dramatic variety, peaks and valleys, deserts and oases, all born from his desperate longing for his celestial sister. Nut's sorrow proved equally transformative. Stretched across the heavens by her father's inexorable strength, she wept tears that became the first rains. Her body arched in a great curve from east to west, and the stars embedded in her skin began their eternal dance across the night sky. Her breathing created the atmospheric currents that would carry weather patterns across the earth, and her heartbeat established the rhythm that would govern the tides in seas yet to be created. Despite their physical separation, the love between Geb and Nut remained undiminished. In secret moments when Shu's attention wavered, they managed brief encounters that resulted in Nut's pregnancy. The earth god's seed took root in the sky goddess's womb, beginning the development of 5 children who would become the most important deities in the Egyptian pantheon. However, their clandestine union did not escape Ra's notice for long. When the sun god discovered Nut's condition, his rage burned with the intensity of 1,000 desert suns. The sky goddess had defied the cosmic order he had established, continuing her forbidden relationship despite his clear prohibition. Her pregnancy represented not just personal disobedience, but a fundamental challenge to the structure of creation itself. If divine beings could ignore the boundaries necessary for cosmic stability, then chaos would inevitably return to consume all that had been accomplished. Ra's punishment fell upon Nut with devastating precision. Speaking with the full authority of the creator of all things, he pronounced a curse that would prevent her from giving birth on any day of the year. The 360 days that comprised the Egyptian calendar became forbidden to her, each one sealed against the possibility of her children entering the world. The curse bound itself to the very fabric of time, making it impossible for Nut to deliver her offspring during any officially recognized day. The sky goddess writhed in agony as her pregnancy continued without the possibility of completion. Her children grew within her womb, fully formed and ready for birth, but the curse held them trapped in a state of perpetual anticipation. Geb watched helplessly from below as his beloved suffered, unable to provide any assistance that might ease her pain or circumvent Ra's prohibition. The other gods looked on with a mixture of sympathy and fear, recognizing that Ra's power extended even over the fundamental processes of birth and death. Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom and writing, observed Nut's predicament with the calculating intelligence that had made him Ra's most trusted advisor. His keen mind, always working to solve complex problems through knowledge and cunning rather than brute force, began to examine the exact wording of Ra's curse. The sun god had forbidden Nut from giving birth on any day of the year, but what if additional days could be added to the year? Days that existed outside the original 360 and therefore beyond the reach of the prohibition? The god of wisdom knew that such days could not be created from nothing. They would have to be won from someone who already possessed them. His attention turned to Khonsu, the moon god, whose silver light marked the passage of time and who controlled certain temporal resources that might be utilized for this purpose. Khonsu appeared as a young man wrapped in mummy bandages, his head crowned with both the full moon disk and a crescent. His skin held the pale luminescence of moonlight, and his eyes reflected the phases of his celestial body as it waxed and waned across the night sky. Thoth approached Khonsu with a proposal for a game of Senet, the ancient Egyptian board game that combined strategy with chance. The stakes would be temporal rather than material. Portions of Khonsu's own light, measured in fractions of days, would be wagered on each move of the game pieces across the checkered board. The moon god, confident in his gaming skills and perhaps unaware of the full implications of what he was risking, agreed to the contest. The game that followed became legendary among the gods for its duration and complexity. Thoth brought to bear all his knowledge of mathematics, probability, and strategic thinking, while Khonsu relied on his intuitive understanding of cycles and natural rhythms. The Senet board, carved from precious ebony and inlaid with gold and silver squares, became the stage for a contest that would alter the fundamental structure of time itself. Move by move, throw by throw of the casting sticks that determined the movement of pieces, Thoth gradually gained the advantage. His superior understanding of the game's mathematical principles allowed him to calculate probabilities and plan strategies that extended far beyond Khonsu's more intuitive approach. The moon god's light began to dim as portions of his luminous essence passed to Thoth with each lost wager. When the final moves had been played and the last pieces removed from the board, Thoth had won exactly 172 N of Khonsu's light, enough to create 5 additional days beyond the standard 360-day year. These days, existing outside the original temporal framework that Ra had cursed, provided the loophole that would allow Nut to give birth to her children. The moon god's dimmed radiance explained why the moon appeared less bright than the sun, having lost a portion of its original luminosity to Thoth's clever gaming. The 5 extra days that Thoth had won became known as the epagomenal days, positioned at the end of the standard year but separate from it. During these days, which existed in a temporal space beyond Ra's original prohibition, Nut finally found relief from her prolonged labour. One by one, her children emerged into the world, each birth marking a significant addition to the divine pantheon and establishing the core relationships that would define Egyptian mythology for millennia to come. On the first epagomenal day, Osiris emerged as the eldest of Nut's children. His skin bore the green hue of growing vegetation, and his tall, perfectly proportioned form radiated the quiet authority of a natural leader. The white crown of Upper Egypt materialized upon his head even as he drew his first breath, marking him as destined for kingship. His hands, long and elegant, seemed designed for holding the crook and flail that would become his symbols of royal authority. Even as an infant, Osiris displayed the calm wisdom and natural charisma that would make him beloved by gods and mortals alike. The second day brought forth Horus the Elder, whose hawk-headed form and piercing golden eyes marked him as a god of the sky and solar power. His wings, when fully extended, could span the entire horizon, and his cry carried across vast distances with the authority of divine command. Unlike his younger brother, who would later bear the same name, this Horus represented the cosmic principle of kingship itself, the divine force that legitimized earthly rule through celestial authority. On the third epagomenal day, Seth burst into existence with a violence that shook the heavens, his unusual appearance featuring the head of an identifiable animal with a long, curved snout and erect, squared ears immediately marked him as different from his siblings. His red eyes blazed with barely contained fury, and his muscular body radiated an aura of chaos and destruction. Even his birth cry sounded like the roar of desert storms, promising future conflicts that would test the stability of the divine order. The fourth day saw the birth of Isis, whose beauty and wisdom would make her the most beloved goddess in the Egyptian pantheon. Her dark hair fell in perfect waves, around a face that combined maternal tenderness with keen intelligence. The throne hieroglyph that would become her symbol appeared as a crown upon her head, indicating her destined role as the divine queen and mother. Her eyes held depths of knowledge that seemed to encompass all the mysteries of life, death, and rebirth. Nephthys, born on the fifth and final epagomenal day, emerged as Isis's shadow and complement. Where Isis represented the beneficial aspects of feminine divine power, Nephthys embodied the darker but equally necessary functions of death and mourning. Her pale skin and dark-rimmed eyes gave her an ethereal beauty, tinged with melancholy, and her voice carried the haunting quality of funeral laments. Despite her association with death, she radiated a gentle compassion for all who suffered loss. The birth of these 5 deities completed the Aeneid of Heliopolis, the 9 gods who would form the core of Egyptian religious belief. Ra's original emergence from the primordial waters had begun the process. His creation of Shu and Tefnut had continued it. Their production of Geb and Nut had complicated it, and now the birth of Osiris, Horus the Elder, Seth, Isis, and Nephthys had brought it to its destined completion. With the completion of the Aeneid, Ra faced the monumental task of establishing order throughout his creation. The birth of Nut's 5 children had populated the divine realm with powerful beings whose relationships and conflicts threatened to destabilize the cosmos he had worked so carefully to construct. The passionate love between Geb and Nut, the violent nature of Seth, and the complex dynamics between the newly born deities required immediate divine intervention to prevent chaos from reasserting its dominance over the ordered universe. Ra's response to this challenge demonstrated his evolution from creator to ruler. No longer content merely to bring beings into existence, he now assumed the role of cosmic sovereign, establishing the fundamental principle that would govern Egyptian civilization for thousands of years: Ma'at, the divine order that maintained balance between chaos and order, truth and falsehood, justice and corruption. This concept transcended simple rulemaking, representing instead the underlying mathematical precision that kept stars in their courses, rivers flowing in their channels, and societies functioning according to divine will. The establishment of Ma'at required Ra to transform himself once again, this time into the supreme judge whose decisions would determine the fate of gods and mortals alike. His palace materialized in the eastern horizon, constructed not of stone or wood but of crystallized sunlight that refracted into every color imaginable while maintaining its essential golden radiance. The structure rose in terraced levels, each one representing a different aspect of divine authority. The lowest level housed the halls of judgment where disputes between lesser deities were resolved, while the highest platform supported Ra's throne room, from which he could observe all creation simultaneously. The throne itself exemplified the fusion of power and cosmic order that defined Ra's reign. Carved from a single piece of meteoric stone that had fallen from the primordial waters of Nun, its surface bore hieroglyphic inscriptions that recorded the fundamental laws governing existence. The backrest rose in the shape of the Benben stone, reminding all who approached of Ra's self-created origins and his unique position as the source of all divine authority. Golden armrests terminated in carved falcon heads, their eyes set with precious stones that reflected the light of truth, while the seat cushion consisted of woven sunbeams that provided comfort without diminishing the throne's awesome majesty. From this seat of ultimate authority, Ra established the divine kingship model that would serve as the template for pharaonic rule throughout Egyptian history. His daily routine became a carefully orchestrated demonstration of royal power, beginning before dawn when he emerged from his private chambers wearing the double crown that symbolized dominion over both Upper and Lower Egypt. The crown's white section, representing Upper Egypt, rose in a tall conical shape that caught the first rays of morning light, while the red crown of Lower Egypt curved around his brow like a protective serpent, ready to strike down any who challenged his authority. Ra's court assembled each morning in strict hierarchical order, with the most powerful deities occupying positions closest to the throne, while lesser divine beings arranged themselves according to their rank and function. Thoth, as the god of wisdom and Ra's chief advisor, stood at the right hand of the throne, his ibis head tilted attentively as he recorded the day's pronouncements on papyrus scrolls that would become eternal law. His keen eyes missed nothing, and his quick intelligence allowed him to anticipate Ra's needs before they were voiced, making him indispensable to the smooth functioning of divine government. Horus, in his role as Ra's champion and enforcer, occupied the position to the left of the throne. His falcon form radiated controlled power, wings folded but ready to spread at a moment's notice should any threat to cosmic order manifest itself. His golden eyes constantly scanned the assembled court, watching for signs of discord or rebellion that might require immediate intervention. The god's presence served as a visible reminder that Ra's authority extended beyond mere words to encompass the physical force necessary to maintain divine law. The establishment of Ma'at as the governing principle of creation required Ra to define the precise balance between opposing forces that would maintain cosmic stability. Chaos could not be entirely eliminated, for without it the dynamic tension necessary for growth and change would disappear, leaving creation static and lifeless. Order could not be absolute, for perfect rigidity would prevent the flexibility needed to adapt to new circumstances and challenges. The solution lay in maintaining a careful equilibrium, where each force checked the other without destroying it entirely. This balance manifested itself in Ra's daily journey across the sky, a cosmic voyage that demonstrated the cyclical nature of existence and the eternal struggle between light and darkness, order and chaos, life and death. Each morning, as Khepri the scarab beetle, Ra began his journey by pushing the solar disk above the eastern horizon, symbolically rolling the sun across the sky just as the sacred beetle rolled balls of dung across the earth. This humble beginning emphasized that even the mightiest divine power required constant effort and vigilance to maintain cosmic order. The solar bark that carried Ra across the heavens represented one of the most sophisticated achievements of divine engineering. Constructed from cedar wood that grew in the celestial realm and reinforced with bands of electrum that never tarnished, the vessel measured exactly 770 cubits in length, a dimension that corresponded to the mathematical relationships governing the movement of celestial bodies. The hull's deep draft allowed it to navigate the celestial waters that flowed above the earth, while its shallow curved prow cut through the atmospheric resistance that might otherwise slow the sun's progress across the sky. The bark's crew consisted of carefully selected deities whose combined abilities ensured safe passage through the dangers that threatened the daily solar journey. Thoth served as navigator, his mathematical knowledge allowing him to calculate the precise course that would bring the sun to each point on Earth at exactly the right moment. His ibis head turned constantly from side to side, watching for obstacles or threats that might disrupt the carefully timed voyage, while his hands manipulated celestial instruments that measured the boat's position relative to the stars and planets. Horus acted as the bark's lookout and defender, his extraordinary vision capable of spotting dangers long before they became immediate threats. Perched at the vessel's prow, his falcon form remained motionless for hours at a time, only the occasional turn of his head indicating his constant vigilance. When threats materialized, his response was swift and decisive, diving from his perch with talons extended to to drive away any hostile forces that might endanger Ra's passage. Several protective deities accompanied the solar bark on its daily journey, each contributing specialized abilities to ensure the sun's safe transit across the sky. Sia, the god of perception and thoughtfulness, stood near Ra's throne, his keen intellect constantly analyzing potential problems and proposing solutions before crises could develop. His tall, lean form remained perfectly still during the voyage, but his mind worked continuously, processing vast amounts of information about weather patterns, atmospheric conditions, and the activities of potentially hostile supernatural forces. Hu, the god of divine utterance, served as Ra's voice and herald, announcing the sun god's presence as the bark approached each region of the earth. His powerful voice could be heard across vast distances, proclaiming Ra's beneficent intentions and calling upon local deities to prepare for the solar passage. When necessary, Hu's words carried the force of divine command, compelling obedience from any beings that might otherwise interfere with the sun's progress. The daily solar journey followed a precise schedule that never varied, demonstrating Ra's commitment to maintaining the cosmic order he had established. The bark departed from the eastern horizon exactly at dawn, its timing coordinated with the natural rhythms of earthly life so that farmers could begin their work, merchants could open their shops, and all the activities of civilization could proceed according to divine plan. The vessel's speed remained constant throughout the morning hours, ensuring that the sun's warmth reached every corner of the earth in proper sequence. At midday, when the sun reached its zenith, Ra transformed from Khepri into his full solar aspect, radiating maximum power and authority from his throne aboard the celestial vessel. This moment represented the peak of divine energy, when Ra's creative and sustaining powers operated at their highest intensity. The transformation occurred gradually, with the scarab form dissolving into pure light that reformed as the familiar human-headed figure crowned with the solar disk. The process took several minutes to complete, during which the sun appeared to pause in its journey across the sky, creating the brief period of intense heat and stillness that mark the middle of each day. During the afternoon hours, as the bark continued its westward journey, Ra's attention turned to the administration of justice and the resolution of conflicts that had arisen during the preceding night and morning. Petitions from gods and mortals reached him through various supernatural channels, and his responses established precedents that would guide future decisions. His judgments demonstrated the practical application of Ma'at, showing how abstract principles of cosmic order could be applied to specific situations and disputes. The creation of humanity from Ra's tears represented one of the most significant events of the Golden Age, establishing the special relationship between the sun god and mortal beings that would define Egyptian civilization for millennia. The tears that produced the first humans were not born of sorrow or pain, but rather of joy and satisfaction, as Ra observed the beauty and complexity of the world he had created. These tears of divine happiness, falling from his eyes as he surveyed his handiwork from the solar bark, struck the earth and immediately transformed into the first human beings. These primordial humans possessed capabilities far beyond those of their later descendants, reflecting their direct creation from Ra's own divine essence. Their bodies showed no signs of aging or disease, their minds comprehended complex truths without lengthy study, and their hearts remained naturally aligned with Ma'at, requiring no external guidance to distinguish right from wrong. They lived in perfect harmony with the natural world, understanding the languages of animals and plants, predicting weather patterns through observation of subtle signs, and maintaining their health through knowledge of medicinal herbs and healing techniques that later generations would struggle to rediscover. The Golden Age that followed humanity's creation represented the pinnacle of cosmic harmony, when gods and mortals lived together in peaceful cooperation rather than the separation that would characterize later periods. Divine beings walked openly among humans, sharing their knowledge and providing direct guidance for the development of civilization. Ra himself descended regularly from his celestial palace to walk among his human children, offering advice on agriculture, governance, architecture, and the arts that would form the foundation of Egyptian culture. During these terrestrial visits, Ra appeared in his most benevolent aspect, his divine radiance dimmed to levels that mortal eyes could safely behold without being blinded or burned. His tall, perfectly proportioned form moved with fluid grace through human settlements, and his voice carried the warm authority of a loving father, instructing his children in the ways of wisdom and righteousness. Wherever he walked, crops grew more abundantly, sick individuals recovered their health, and disputes resolved themselves through the natural influence of his presence. The humans of the Golden Age responded to Ra's beneficence with spontaneous worship and gratitude, building the first temples and establishing the ritual practices that would evolve into the complex religious system of later Egyptian civilization. These early temples, constructed under direct divine guidance, achieved architectural perfection that later builders would struggle to match. Their proportions reflected the mathematical relationships that governed cosmic harmony. Their orientations aligned precisely with celestial movements, and their decoration incorporated symbolic elements that conveyed profound theological truths to those capable of understanding their meaning. The prosperity of the Golden Age rested upon a foundation more profound than the visible manifestations of Ra's power. Beneath the daily spectacle of the solar journey, beyond the magnificent displays of divine authority in his celestial palace, lay the ultimate source of Ra's supremacy over all creation, his secret name. This name, known in the ancient texts as his Ren, contained within its syllables the fundamental essence of his being, the concentrated power that had enabled him to emerge from the primordial waters of none and create the ordered universe from chaos. Egyptian theology recognized multiple aspects of divine identity, but none carried the significance of the true name. A being's public names, Ra, Atum, Khepri, described functions and manifestations, but the secret name embodied the core of existence itself. To know this name meant possessing power over its bearer, the ability to command their actions and access their deepest mysteries. Ra guarded this knowledge with absolute vigilance, for its revelation would fundamentally alter the balance of power within the divine hierarchy and potentially threaten the cosmic order he'd established. The secret name pulsed through Ra's being like a hidden heartbeat, its rhythm synchronized with the movement of celestial bodies and the flow of the Nile. When he spoke, traces of its power colored his words with irresistible authority. When he moved, its energy flowed through his limbs, enabling him to manipulate matter and energy according to his will. When he thought, its essence shaped his consciousness, granting him omniscience within the bounds of his creation. Yet despite its constant presence within him, Ra never allowed the name to pass his lips or form completely in his mind, maintaining the absolute secrecy that preserved his supreme position. The other members of the Aeneid had long suspected the existence of this hidden source of power. They observed how Ra's authority transcended mere seniority or creative precedence, noting that even the most rebellious deities ultimately submitted to his will when he spoke with full divine authority. Thoth, with his penetrating intelligence, had theorized about the mathematical relationships that might govern such concentrated power. Horus had sensed during their collaborations that Ra drew upon resources beyond those visible to even divine perception, but none had dared to investigate further, recognizing that such knowledge was deliberately withheld for reasons that likely ensured the stability of existence itself. Isis, however, possessed both the cunning necessary to devise a plan for discovering the secret and the magical expertise required to implement it successfully. Her reputation as the greatest sorceress among the gods rested not merely on her knowledge of spells and rituals, but on her profound understanding of the hidden connections that linked all aspects of creation. She had mastered the art of sympathetic magic, which operated on the principle that objects or substances that had once been connected retained invisible bonds that could be manipulated by those who understood their nature. The goddess recognized that obtaining Ra's secret name through direct confrontation or negotiation was impossible. The sun god's awareness of its importance and his commitment to protecting it made any straightforward approach doomed to failure. Instead, she would need to create circumstances that would compel him to reveal the name voluntarily, preferably in a moment of desperation, when his usual caution might be overcome by immediate necessity. Her opportunity arose during one of Ra's regular terrestrial visits, when the sun god walked among his human worshippers in his dimmed but still magnificent form. These journeys followed established routes through the major population centres, allowing Ra to observe the progress of civilization and address any problems that required divine intervention. The god's routine had become predictable over the centuries of the Golden Age, creating the opening that Isis needed to implement her carefully conceived plan. As Ra walked along a dusty path between two thriving settlements, his divine essence occasionally manifested in small, seemingly insignificant ways. His footsteps left brief impressions that glowed faintly before fading. His breath stirred the air with currents that carried hints of celestial fragrance, and his saliva, when he paused to speak with particularly devout worshippers, sometimes fell to the ground as droplets that retained traces of his divine power. Isis, observing from concealment with the patience of a master huntress, waited for the perfect moment to collect one of these precious drops. Her keen eyes tracked Ra's movements, noting the rhythm of his speech and identifying the moments when his attention focused most completely on the humans before him. When the sun god paused to bless a group of farmers who had constructed a small shrine in his honour, his animated description of proper irrigation techniques caused several drops of saliva to fall unnoticed to the earth. Moving with supernatural stealth, Isis collected the still warm droplets before they could be absorbed into the ground or evaporate in the desert heat. The divine saliva retained its potency for only a brief period after leaving Ra's body, requiring immediate action to preserve its essential properties. She mixed the precious substance with earth from the exact spot where Ra had stood, creating a small quantity of clay that pulsed with residual divine energy. The clay felt warm in her hands, its temperature fluctuating in rhythm, with some internal force that seemed to echo Ra's heartbeat. Its colour shifted subtly between the golden hue of desert sand and the deeper brown of fertile Nile mud, never quite settling on a single shade. When she pressed it between her fingers, tiny sparks of light flickered within its substance, and she could hear the faint whisper of power that marked all objects touched by concentrated divine essence. Working with the focused intensity that characterized her greatest magical endeavors, Isis shaped the clay into the form of a serpent. Her skilled hands molded each scale with precision, creating a creature that appeared completely natural yet contained within its form the compressed power of Ra's own divine nature. The serpent's length measured exactly 1 royal cubit. Its thickness corresponded to the width of a man's thumb, and its head bore the distinctive triangular shape of the horned viper, one of the most venomous creatures inhabiting the Egyptian desert. The magical serpent required more than mere physical form to accomplish its intended purpose. Isis breathed upon the clay figure, infusing it with the breath of life that would animate its earthen body. She whispered incantations that bound her will to its primitive consciousness, ensuring that it would act according to her intentions while appearing to follow its own serpentine instincts. Most crucially, she wove into its very essence a compulsion to strike at the first divine being it encountered, delivering its venom with the concentrated force of Ra's own power turned against him. The completed serpent lay coiled in her palm, its surface indistinguishable from living flesh despite its artificial origin. Its eyes, formed from tiny chips of obsidian, gleamed with malevolent intelligence, and its forked tongue flickered in and out of its mouth with the nervous energy of a predator awaiting its prey. When Isis set it upon the ground, it immediately began moving with the fluid grace of a natural serpent, its body undulating in perfect sinusoidal waves as it sought concealment among the rocks and sparse vegetation beside the path. Isis positioned her creation at a point where Ra would pass during his return journey to the eastern horizon. The serpent coiled itself beneath a flat stone that provided both concealment and a perfect striking position, its body compressed like a loaded spring ready to unleash its deadly attack. The goddess then withdrew to a safe distance, using her magical abilities to maintain awareness of the trap's status while avoiding any suspicion that might alert Ra to the danger awaiting him. The sun god's return journey began at the appointed time, his divine form moving with the measured pace that had characterized his terrestrial visits for countless years. His attention remained focused on the observations he'd made during the day's travels, his mind processing the information that would inform his decisions about the ongoing development of human civilization. The familiar path posed no apparent threats, and his usual vigilance relaxed slightly. As he approached the area, the serpent lay in wait. The attack came without warning as Ra's foot passed within striking distance of the hidden viper. The serpent's head shot forward with lightning speed, its fangs penetrating the divine flesh of Ra's ankle and injecting venom that burned with the concentrated fury of the sun god's own power. The bite delivered not merely the natural poison of a desert viper, but the transformed essence of Ra's divinity, turned hostile through Isis's magical manipulation and now spreading through his immortal body like liquid fire. Ra's cry of pain and surprise echoed across the desert with the force of thunder, causing the ground to tremble and the sky to flicker with unnatural colours. The sun god staggered, his perfect balance disrupted by the sudden agony that shot through his leg and began spreading upward through his divine form. His hands clutched at the wound, but his healing powers, normally capable of instantly repairing any damage, proved ineffective against venom created from his own essence. The poison coursed through Ra's celestial body with devastating efficiency, causing symptoms that no god had ever experienced. His golden skin began to pale and take on a sickly greenish hue. His breathing became laboured and irregular, and his vision blurred as the venom affected his divine perceptions. Most alarming of all, his control over his own divine power began to waver, causing dangerous fluctuations in the natural forces he normally regulated with effortless precision. The sun itself flickered and dimmed as Ra's condition worsened, casting the world into an unnatural twilight that terrified both gods and mortals. The Nile's flow became erratic, alternately rushing in torrents and slowing to a trickle as the cosmic harmony that depended on Ra's stable presence began to collapse. Plants withered and revived in rapid cycles, animals fled in panic from the supernatural disturbances, and the very foundations of creation groaned under the strain of their creator's affliction. Recognizing that his condition threatened not merely his own existence but the stability of the entire universe, Ra summoned the other members of the Aeneid to his aid. His voice, normally commanding and clear, cracked with pain as he called for assistance, and his divine messengers struggled to maintain their forms while carrying his words through the supernatural chaos that his illness had unleashed. The gods responded with desperate urgency, recognizing that Ra's death would mean the end of all creation. Thoth arrived first, his keen intellect immediately assessing the situation and identifying the supernatural nature of the venom coursing through Ra's system. Horus followed, his warrior's instinct seeking enemies to fight, even as he realized that no conventional battle could resolve this crisis. Geb and Nut manifested despite the ongoing strain of their enforced separation, their concern for their grandfather overriding their personal anguish. Each deity attempted to apply their specialized abilities to Ra's condition, but their efforts proved futile against the unique properties of the magical poison. Thoth's vast knowledge of medicine and healing magic found no precedent for venom created from the victim's own divine essence. Horus's protective powers could shield Ra from external threats, but could not purge the corruption that now flowed through his immortal blood. The other gods watched helplessly as their supreme leader writhed in agony that seemed to intensify with each passing moment. It was at this moment of ultimate crisis that Isis stepped forward. her expression carefully composed to hide her satisfaction at the success of her plan. She approached Ra with the concerned demeanour of a devoted subject, her magical senses ostensibly probing his condition, while actually monitoring the progress of her carefully crafted venom. Her voice carried notes of genuine worry, as she announced that she might possess the knowledge necessary to heal the sun god's mysterious affliction. Ra's eyes, clouded with pain but still burning with divine intelligence, fixed upon Isis with desperate hope. The goddess explained that the venom appeared to be of supernatural origin, created through magic so sophisticated that conventional healing methods could not counter its effects. However, she continued, her own mastery of the magical arts might enable her to devise a cure, provided she could understand the true nature of the power that the poison was attacking. The implication was clear, though Isis never stated it directly. To heal Ra, she would need to know his secret name, the source of power that the venom was systematically corrupting. Only by understanding the fundamental essence of his being could she craft a magical remedy that would restore him to health and prevent the collapse of creation itself. Ra's initial response was a firm refusal, his commitment to protecting his secret name remaining strong despite his desperate circumstances. He insisted that other solutions must exist, that the combined wisdom of the Aeneid could surely find an alternative approach that would not require such a dangerous revelation. But as the venom continued its relentless assault on his divine system, and as the signs of cosmic collapse became increasingly evident, his resistance began to weaken. The sun god's condition deteriorated steadily as precious time was lost in futile attempts to find alternative solutions. His breathing became increasingly shallow, his divine radiance continued to fade, and the supernatural chaos affecting the natural world intensified to levels that threatened permanent damage to the cosmic order. Finally, with the reluctance of one surrendering his most precious treasure, Ra agreed to reveal his secret name to Isis, extracting from her the most solemn oaths that she would use the knowledge only to heal him and would never reveal it to any other being. Isis swore the required oaths with convincing sincerity, her voice carrying the weight of binding magical commitment, even as her mind raced with anticipation of the power she was about to acquire. Ra, his strength nearly exhausted by the ongoing effects of the venom, drew upon his remaining reserves to speak the syllables that contained the essence of his being, the secret name that had remained hidden since his emergence from the primordial waters of Nun. The name itself transcended mortal comprehension, its pronunciation requiring divine vocal cords, and its meaning encompassing concepts that existed beyond normal language. As Ra spoke it, the air around him shimmered with released power, and Isis felt the knowledge settling into her consciousness like a physical weight. The secret name revealed not merely Ra's identity, but the fundamental principles underlying his authority, the mathematical relationships that governed his creative abilities, and the hidden connections that linked him to every aspect of existence. Armed with this ultimate knowledge, Isis quickly prepared the healing magic that would cure Ra's affliction. Her hands moved with practiced precision as she gathered the necessary components and spoke the incantations that would neutralize the venom's effects. The cure worked with gratifying speed, the poison dissolving under the influence of magic that now operated with the full authority of Ra's own power. As Ra's strength returned and his divine radiance resumed its normal intensity, the cosmic chaos that had threatened creation began to subside. The sun stabilized in its course, the Nile resumed its proper flow, and the natural world settled back into its accustomed rhythms. But the fundamental balance of power within the divine hierarchy had shifted irrevocably, for Isis now possessed knowledge that placed her on an equal footing with the sun god himself. The knowledge of Ra's secret name transformed Isis into a goddess of unprecedented power, but this shift in the cosmic balance coincided with troubling changes among the mortal population that Ra had created from his tears of joy. The humans who had once lived in perfect harmony with divine will began to exhibit disturbing signs of independence and defiance. Where previous generations had accepted Ra's authority without question, younger humans increasingly challenged the wisdom of divine commandments and questioned the necessity of maintaining the elaborate rituals that honoured their creator. This transformation manifested most clearly in the great cities that had grown along the Nile's banks during the Golden Age. Memphis, the gleaming capital where humans and gods had once mingled freely, now echoed with voices raised in sceptical debate about divine authority. Thebes, whose massive temples had been constructed under direct divine guidance, witnessed the emergence of philosophical schools that taught human reason could solve problems without supernatural intervention. Even in smaller settlements, farmers who had once offered the first fruits of their harvest to Ra's temples began keeping larger portions for themselves, arguing that their own labour deserved greater recognition than divine blessing. The rebellion began subtly, manifesting as a gradual erosion of respect rather than open defiance. Humans continued to perform the required religious observances, but their hearts were no longer fully committed to the worship that had once defined their relationship with the divine realm. They built temples with less enthusiasm, carved devotional inscriptions with perfunctory attention to detail, and participated in festivals with the mechanical precision of those fulfilling obligations, rather than expressing genuine reverence. Ra observed these changes with growing concern from his celestial palace. His omniscient awareness, which extended throughout all creation, detected the subtle shifts in human consciousness that preceded more dangerous forms of rebellion. The prayers that reached him carried different emotional undertones than before, tinged with resentment rather than gratitude, obligation rather than love. The offerings presented at his altars, while technically adequate, lacked the spiritual sincerity that had once made them acceptable to divine taste. The sun god's aging appearance contributed significantly to humanity's growing boldness in challenging his authority. The millennia of maintaining cosmic order had left their mark on his divine form, creating visible signs of weariness that mortals interpreted as weakness. His golden skin, once uniformly radiant, now showed patches of dimmer luminosity, particularly around his eyes and mouth, where the strain of constant vigilance had taken its toll. His movements, previously characterized by fluid grace and unlimited energy, now displayed the measured pace of one conserving strength for truly important tasks. Most significantly, Ra's voice had lost some of its commanding resonance. Where his words had once carried irresistible authority that compelled immediate obedience, they now required reinforcement through visible demonstrations of power to achieve the same effect. Humans noticed these changes with the keen perception that mortals always applied to their rulers, and their confidence in challenging divine authority grew proportionally to their perception of divine vulnerability. The rebellion escalated when a group of influential priests in Memphis openly questioned Ra's continued fitness to rule both gods and mortals. These religious leaders, who had once served as intermediaries between divine and human realms, now argued that Ra's apparent decline threatened the stability of the cosmic order itself. They proposed that younger, more vigorous deities should assume greater responsibility for governing creation, relegating the aging sun god to an honorary position that would preserve his dignity while transferring real power to more capable hands. This theological revolution spread rapidly throughout the human population, gaining support from merchants who chafed under divine restrictions on commerce, soldiers who questioned the necessity of fighting according to divine rules of warfare, and artisans who believed their creative abilities exceeded those demonstrated in divine works. The rebellion took on increasingly practical dimensions as humans began ignoring divine commandments that interfered with their immediate desires and ambitions. Tax collectors appointed by divine authority found their demands met with sophisticated arguments about the legitimacy of supernatural taxation. Judges who based their decisions on principles derived from Mayat discovered that litigants now challenged the relevance of cosmic justice to human affairs. Even farmers, the most traditionally conservative segment of the population, began experimenting with agricultural techniques that violated divine guidelines about proper relationships between human activity and natural cycles. The situation reached a critical point when rebels in several major cities simultaneously defaced temples dedicated to Ra's worship. These acts of vandalism went beyond mere property damage to constitute deliberate insults to divine authority. In Memphis, vandals chiseled away portions of hieroglyphic inscriptions that praised Ra's creative achievements, replacing them with texts that celebrated human accomplishments. In Thebes, rebels toppled statues of the sun god from their pedestals and erected monuments to mortal heroes in their place. Throughout the Nile Valley, sacred barks used in religious processions were burned in public ceremonies that mocked the daily solar journey across the heavens. Ra's response to these provocations revealed the depth of his rage and the dangerous instability that his apparent aging had introduced into the cosmic order. The sun god's fury, when finally unleashed, burned with an intensity that threatened to consume not merely the rebellious humans, but the entire structure of creation itself. His divine wrath manifested as solar flares that scorched the Earth's surface, causing rivers to boil and transforming fertile fields into barren wastelands. The sky itself seemed to catch fire as Ra's anger coloured the atmosphere with unnatural shades of red and orange that persisted from dawn to dusk. Recognizing that his emotional response threatened to destroy the very creation he sought to preserve, Ra summoned the other members of the Aeneid to an emergency council in his celestial palace. The assembled gods arrived to find their supreme leader in a state of barely controlled fury, his divine radiance flickering between brilliant golden light and the deep red glow of molten metal. The throne room itself reflected Ra's emotional condition, its crystallized sunlight walls pulsing with colours that shifted according to the sun god's fluctuating moods. Thoth, ever the voice of measured wisdom, attempted to counsel patience and restraint. The god of knowledge argued that humanity's rebellion represented a natural phase in their development, rather than a fundamental rejection of divine authority. His analysis suggested that the humans were testing boundaries rather than seeking complete independence, and that a carefully calibrated response might restore proper relationships without requiring devastating punishment. Horus, speaking from his perspective as Ra's military champion, advocated for a decisive demonstration of divine power that would crush the rebellion before it could spread further. The falcon-headed god's warrior instincts recognized that half measures in dealing with insurrection often led to prolonged conflicts that ultimately required more severe solutions. His recommendation involved a systematic campaign of targeted destruction that would eliminate rebel leaders while sparing the general population. Geb and Nut, despite their ongoing separation, both counselled mercy for the humans who lived upon the Earth's surface and beneath the sky's protective embrace. Their intimate connection with the mortal realm gave them unique insight into human motivations and limitations. They argued that the rebels acted from ignorance rather than malice, and that education rather than punishment might prove more effective in restoring proper divine-human relationships. Isis, her newfound knowledge of Ra's secret name giving her unprecedented influence in divine councils, offered a more nuanced perspective. She recognized that the rebellion represented both a challenge to cosmic order and an opportunity to redefine the relationship between gods and mortals on terms that might prove more stable in the long term. Her analysis suggested that complete suppression of human independence would only create conditions for future, more dangerous rebellions. Seth, true to his nature as the embodiment of chaos and conflict, enthusiastically supported the most extreme measures possible. The red-eyed god of storms and violence saw in the human rebellion an opportunity to unleash destructive forces that had been constrained during the Golden Age's emphasis on order and harmony. His recommendations involved not merely punishing the rebels, but fundamentally restructuring creation to eliminate the possibility of future challenges to divine authority. After listening to these diverse perspectives, Ra made a decision that reflected both his divine wisdom and his deeply wounded pride. Rather than personally intervening in the rebellion, he would delegate the task of punishment to an aspect of his own power that could act with the necessary ruthlessness, while preserving his role as the ultimate source of cosmic order. This decision led to the manifestation of one of the most terrifying forces in Egyptian mythology, the Eye of Ra, embodied in the fearsome form of Sekhmet, the lioness goddess of war and vengeance. The creation of Sekhmet required Ra to externalize the most violent aspects of his divine nature, concentrating his capacity for destruction into a separate entity that could act independently while remaining fundamentally connected to his will. The process began with Ra removing his own eye, the organ through which his divine vision surveyed all creation and maintained cosmic order. As the eye separated from his divine form, it began to transform, growing larger and more powerful as it absorbed the concentrated essence of Ra's wrath. The eye's transformation into Sekhmet occurred gradually, its spherical form elongating and developing the distinctive features of a lioness. Golden fur sprouted from its surface, muscles formed beneath the skin, and powerful limbs emerged to support a body designed for maximum predatory efficiency. The goddess's head retained the fierce beauty of a lioness, with amber eyes that burned with Ra's own divine fire, and jaws equipped with fangs capable of tearing through both mortal flesh and supernatural defences. Sekhmet's physical form embodied the perfect fusion of feline grace and divine power. Her height exceeded that of mortal humans by several cubits, allowing her to tower over her intended victims while maintaining the fluid movements that characterized the great cats of the African wilderness. Her muscles, visible beneath her golden fur, possessed strength sufficient to crush stone with her bare hands or leap distances that spanned entire city blocks. Most intimidating of all, her roar carried the authority of Ra's own voice, capable of paralyzing enemies with supernatural terror or rallying allies with divine inspiration. The lioness goddess received her commission directly from Ra's lips, her instructions delivered with the full authority of divine command. She was to descend to the mortal realm and systematically eliminate every human who had participated in the rebellion against divine authority. Her judgment would be swift and final, her methods brutal enough to serve as a permanent deterrent to future challenges. No mercy was to be shown to rebels, no consideration given to pleas for forgiveness or clemency. Sekhmet's descent to Earth marked the beginning of a reign of terror that exceeded even Ra's expectations for its thoroughness and brutality. The lioness goddess materialized in Memphis at dawn, her appearance accompanied by supernatural phenomena that immediately announced her divine nature and hostile intentions. The air around her shimmered with heat waves despite the early hour. Plants withered at her approach, and animals fled in panic from her overwhelming predatory presence. Her first victims were the priests who had initiated the theological challenge to Ra's authority. Sekhmet tracked them to their hiding places with the supernatural senses that allowed her to detect guilt and rebellion regardless of physical concealment. Her attacks combined the hunting techniques of a natural predator with the devastating power of a war goddess, resulting in deaths that were both swift and terrible. The priests' bodies, when discovered by terrified survivors, bore wounds that no mortal weapon could have inflicted and showed signs of having been exposed to supernatural fire. The massacre that followed transformed the great cities of Egypt into charnel houses where the living cowered in terror, while Sekhmet methodically hunted down every individual who had shown disrespect for divine authority. Her supernatural senses allowed her to distinguish between genuine rebels and innocent bystanders with perfect accuracy, but her definition of rebellion proved broader than many had anticipated. Merchants who had complained about divine taxation, soldiers who had questioned divine military strategy, and even children who had repeated disrespectful comments about Ra's aging appearance, all fell victim to her relentless campaign of vengeance. The lioness goddess's methods grew increasingly brutal as her bloodlust intensified with each kill. What had begun as swift executions evolved into prolonged hunts where Sekhmet toyed with her victims before delivering the final blow. She developed a preference for attacking during the hottest part of the day, when her solar origins gave her maximum strength, and when the desert heat amplified the terror of those who witnessed her approach. Her roars echoed across the Nile Valley with such frequency that the sound became a constant background to daily life, a reminder that death stalked the land in feline form. The scale of destruction soon exceeded anything that Egypt had experienced since Ra's initial creation of the ordered world. Entire neighbourhoods lay empty, their inhabitants either dead or fled to distant regions where Sekhmet's wrath had not yet reached. The Nile itself began to run red with blood as the goddess's victims accumulated faster than survivors could dispose of their remains. The elaborate irrigation systems that had sustained Egyptian agriculture became clogged with corpses, threatening the food supply that supported the remaining population. As the sun reached its zenith each day and began its inevitable descent toward the western horizon, Ra faced a transformation far more perilous than his daily changes between Khepri, Ra, and Atum. The approaching dusk marked the beginning of his most dangerous journey, the nightly passage through the Duat, the Egyptian underworld that stretched beneath the earth like a vast subterranean mirror of the living world above. This realm of shadows and supernatural threats existed as both the kingdom of the dead and the testing ground, where Ra's divine power faced its greatest challenges. The Duat defied simple geographical description, existing simultaneously as a physical location beneath the earth and a supernatural dimension that operated according to laws fundamentally different from those governing the world of the living. Ancient Egyptian texts described it as a series of interconnected caverns, waterways and chambers that extended for thousands of miles in all directions, their boundaries shifting according to mystical principles rather than fixed architectural plans. The realm's topography included deserts of burning sand, where the bones of ancient enemies lay bleached white, lakes of liquid fire that provided the only illumination in certain regions, and forests of thorned trees whose branches reached toward travellers with predatory intent. The Underworld's 12 divisions corresponded to the 12 hours of night, each representing a distinct phase of Ra's journey and presenting unique challenges that tested different aspects of his divine nature. The first hour began at the western horizon, where the dying light of day met the absolute darkness of the underworld. Here the landscape resembled a twilight version of the familiar Nile Valley, with recognizable features rendered strange and threatening by the absence of solar illumination. Palm trees grew with leaves of tarnished silver, the river ran black as obsidian, and the familiar sounds of earthly life were replaced by whispers that seemed to emerge from the ground itself. The second and third hours led Ra deeper into the underworld's embrace, through regions where the temperature dropped steadily and the air grew thick with supernatural mists that obscured vision beyond a few cubits in any direction. These mists carried the voices of the dead, not merely the recently deceased, but the accumulated multitudes of all who had ever lived and died since creation began. Their words formed an incomprehensible chorus that could drive mortal minds to madness, but Ra's divine consciousness filtered the cacophony into meaningful communications from specific souls seeking his attention or blessing. The fourth and fifth hours presented landscapes of increasing hostility, where the underworld's malevolent nature became fully apparent. Jagged cliffs rose on both sides of the solar bark's path, their surfaces carved with hieroglyphs that recorded the crimes and failures of the damned. Rivers of molten metal flowed through channels cut into the rocky floor, their surfaces reflecting distorted images of the living world above. Strange creatures lurked in shadows cast by no visible light source, their forms combining familiar animal features in combinations that violated natural law: serpents with human heads, crocodiles with wings of rotting leather, jackals whose eyes burned with unnatural fire. The 6th hour marked the deepest point of Ra's underworld journey, the nadir where death and regeneration intersected in the most profound mystery of Egyptian theology. Here, in the heart of the Duat's most sacred chamber, Ra underwent his most significant transformation of the entire daily cycle. His familiar human form dissolved into pure divine essence, which then merged with Osiris, the god of the dead, in a union that symbolized the eternal connection between solar power and the forces of resurrection. This transformation required Ra to assume his ram-headed form, an appearance that emphasized his role as a fertility god whose creative power could overcome even death itself. The ram's head, with its curved horns and wise eyes, replaced Ra's human features while his body retained its divine proportions and golden radiance. The horns served as conduits for divine energy, channeling the power necessary to navigate the underworld's most dangerous regions while maintaining the spiritual authority required to command the respect of the dead. The merger with Osiris occurred within a chamber whose walls were constructed from crystallized night, a substance that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. The chamber's floor consisted of polished obsidian that reflected not physical forms, but the spiritual essence of those who entered. At the chamber's centre stood a raised platform where Osiris waited in his mummified form, his green skin and crossed arms marking him as the eternal king of the dead. When Ra's bark entered this sacred space, the ram-headed sun god stepped down from his vessel and approached Osiris with the measured pace of one participating in an ancient ritual. The two deities embraced, their forms merging into a single being that combined Ra's solar authority with Osiris's dominion over death and rebirth. This unified entity, known as Ra-Osiris, possessed the power to grant new life to the dead while maintaining the cosmic order that prevented the underworld from overwhelming the realm of the living. The union lasted exactly 1 hour, during which Ra-Osiris performed the essential work of judging the dead, renewing the spiritual energy that sustained the underworld's operations and preparing for the challenges that awaited during the remaining hours of the night journey. The merged deity's consciousness encompassed both the life-giving warmth of the sun and the patient wisdom of death, creating a perspective that transcended the limitations of either individual divine nature. Throughout this transformation and the entire underworld journey, Ra faced the constant threat of Apep, the primordial serpent whose very existence challenged the ordered universe that the sun god had created. Apep, also known as Apophis, represented chaos in its purest form, not the creative disorder that enabled change and growth, but the destructive entropy that sought to reduce all existence to the undifferentiated nothingness from which Ra had originally emerged. The serpent's massive coils, each one thick as the trunk of a great sycamore tree, stretched for miles through the underworld's deepest recesses. Apep's appearance defied precise description because the serpent's form constantly shifted between states of existence and non-existence. Its scales appeared sometimes as polished obsidian that reflected distorted images of creation, sometimes as voids that seemed to absorb light and matter alike. The creature's head, when it chose to manifest one, bore features that combined reptilian characteristics with abstract geometric patterns that hurt the eyes of any who looked upon them directly. Its mouth opened onto an interior that appeared infinite, a gateway to the primordial chaos that had existed before creation began. The serpent's method of attack relied not on physical force alone, but on its ability to devour light, order, and meaning itself. When Apep struck at Ra's solar bark, its bite attempted to consume not merely the sun god's physical form, but the fundamental principles that sustained the ordered universe. The creature's venom carried the essence of chaos, capable of unmaking divine flesh and reducing complex thoughts to confused fragments. Even a minor wound from Apep's fangs could cause a god to forget their own name and purpose, while a serious bite might erase them from existence entirely. Each night, Apep positioned itself at different points along Ra's route through the underworld, using its supernatural senses to anticipate the solar bark's course and prepare ambushes that tested the combined defensive capabilities of Ra's divine crew. The Serpent's attacks followed no predictable pattern, sometimes manifesting as direct physical assaults where its massive coils attempted to crush the bark and its occupants, other times appearing as subtle infiltrations where chaos gradually infected the vessel's structure and crew. The defense against Apep required the coordinated efforts of multiple deities, each contributing specialized abilities that complemented the others in a carefully orchestrated system of protection. Set, despite his reputation as a god of chaos and violence, played a crucial role in these nightly battles. His intimate understanding of destructive forces made him uniquely qualified to recognize Apep's attacks and counter them with precisely calibrated applications of controlled chaos that disrupted the Serpent's assaults without damaging the solar bark. Set's appearance during these underworld battles differed significantly from his manifestation in the world of the living. His usual red eyes blazed with silver fire that could penetrate the Duat's supernatural darkness, while his muscular frame expanded to proportions that matched the scale of his serpentine opponent. His weapons, forged from meteoric iron that had fallen from the primordial waters of Nun, carried enchantments that allowed them to wound beings of pure chaos without being corrupted by contact with their essence. The god of storms positioned himself at the bark's prow during the most dangerous hours of the night journey, his keen senses constantly scanning for signs of Apep's presence. His battle cry, when the Serpent attacked, carried across the underworld with such force that it temporarily stabilized the chaotic energies that the creature's presence unleashed. Set's fighting technique combined the calculated precision of a trained warrior with the unpredictable fury of a desert sandstorm, creating attack patterns that Apep's alien intelligence could not easily predict or counter. Thoth's contribution to the bark's defense operated on a more subtle but equally essential level. The ibis-headed god's vast knowledge included detailed information about Apep's nature, capabilities, and historical attack patterns. His perfect memory allowed him to recognize the early signs of the Serpent's approach and coordinate the defensive response with mathematical precision. During battles, Thoth's voice could be heard reciting protective spells whose words carried the authority of divine law, creating barriers of crystallized order that temporarily contained chaos and provided the other defenders with opportunities to strike effectively. The god of wisdom also maintained the magical protections that prevented Apep's chaotic influence from corrupting the solar bark itself. These spells, inscribed in hieroglyphs of liquid light along the vessel's hull, required constant reinforcement as the Serpent's presence gradually eroded their effectiveness. Thoth's hands moved continuously during the most dangerous encounters, tracing symbols in the air that renewed the protective enchantments and repaired damage that chaos had inflicted on the bark's structure. Isis contributed her unparalleled mastery of protective magic to the nightly defense, weaving spells that operated according to principles of sympathetic connection and divine authority. Her knowledge of Ra's secret name gave her access to power sources that other deities could not tap, allowing her to create magical barriers that drew their strength directly from the sun god's essential nature. These protections manifested as nets of golden light that could entangle Apep's coils or walls of crystallized sunlight that block the Serpent's attacks while allowing Ra's radiance to pass through unimpeded. The goddess's magical techniques also included healing spells that could repair damage inflicted by chaos, restoring divine flesh that had been partially unmade by contact with Apep's essence. Her touch could stabilize gods whose thoughts had been scattered by the Serpent's influence, helping them remember their names and purposes when chaos threatened to erase their identities entirely. During the most severe attacks, Isis's magic provided the only means of maintaining the crew's coherence as organized beings capable of coordinated defense. Horus, in his role as Ra's champion and protector, served as the bark's primary offensive weapon against Apep's assaults. His falcon form allowed him to attack the Serpent from angles that its massive size made difficult to defend, diving from above with talons extended to strike at vulnerable points along the creature's length. His supernatural vision could penetrate the darkness and illusions that Apep used to conceal its movements, providing early warning of attacks and identifying weak points in the serpent's defences. The falcon god's weapons included a spear forged from crystallized sunlight and a sword whose blade had been tempered in the fires of creation itself. These divine armaments could wound Apep's chaotic flesh without being corrupted by contact, though each successful strike required immediate purification to prevent chaos from spreading along the weapon's length to affect its wielder. Horus's battle technique emphasized speed and precision over raw power, striking quickly at specific targets before withdrawing to avoid prolonged contact with the serpent's corrupting influence. The solar bark itself served as more than mere transportation during these nightly battles, functioning as a fortress whose design incorporated defensive features specifically intended to counter Apep's attacks. The vessel's hull, constructed from cedar wood that had grown in the celestial realm, possessed natural resistance to chaotic influence. Its planks were joined with the golden nails that carried protective enchantments, while its rigging consisted of ropes woven from the hair of goddesses who had sworn oaths of protection for Ra's nightly journey. The bark's most distinctive defensive feature was its elevated platform at the stern, where Ra's throne provided both a command position and a focal point for the magical energies that powered the vessel's protective systems. The throne's construction incorporated fragments of the original Ben stone from which Ra had first emerged, creating a direct connection to the fundamental forces of creation that Apep sought to destroy. When the serpent attacked, Ra's presence on this throne channeled defensive power throughout the entire vessel, strengthening its resistance to chaos and providing his crew with the spiritual authority necessary to stand against primordial destruction. The bark's crew also included several lesser deities whose specialized abilities contributed to the overall defensive capability. Hu and Sia, the gods of divine utterance and perception, worked together to maintain communication between crew members when Apep's chaotic influence threatened to disrupt normal speech and thought. Their combined efforts created a network of shared consciousness that allowed the defenders to coordinate their actions even when conventional communication became impossible. Vep-Wawet, the wolf-headed opener of ways, served as the bark's navigator through the Underworld's shifting geography. His supernatural senses could detect safe passages through regions where Apep's influence had altered the landscape, while his knowledge of the Duat's hidden paths provided alternative routes when the Serpent blocked the primary channels. During battles, Vep-Wawet's howl could disorient Apep and provide covering sound for the movement of other defenders. The protective spells that guarded Ra's nightly journey operated according to layers of redundant enchantment, each one designed to provide backup protection if others failed under Apep's assault. The outermost layer consisted of detection spells that monitored the underworld for signs of the serpent's approach, providing early warning that allowed the crew to prepare their defences. These spells manifested as invisible networks of magical energy that extended for miles around the bark, their sensitivity calibrated to distinguish between normal underworld phenomena and the specific distortions that Apep's presence created. The second layer included active defensive spells that automatically responded to hostile contact, creating barriers and counterattacks without requiring conscious direction from the crew. These enchantments drew their power from the bark's connection to Ra's divine essence, operating with the speed and precision necessary to counterattacks that moved faster than conscious thought. When Apep struck, these automatic defences bought precious seconds that allowed the crew to assess the threat and coordinate their response. The innermost layer of protection consisted of emergency spells that activated only when all other defences had been breached or overwhelmed. These final safeguards required tremendous amounts of divine energy to maintain, drawing power directly from Ra's life force in exchange for protection that could withstand even Apep's most devastating attacks. The use of these ultimate defences came at significant cost, weakening Ra for the remainder of the night journey, and sometimes affecting his ability to bring the dawn at the appointed time. The battles against Apep and the nightly trials of the Duat had established Ra's supremacy over the forces of chaos, but these victories also highlighted the need for divine allies who could share the burden of maintaining cosmic order. Among all the gods in the Egyptian pantheon, none proved more valuable to Ra's mission than Horus, the falcon-headed deity whose mastery of the sky and association with kingship made him a natural partner for the sun god's endeavours. The alliance between these two powerful deities would reshape Egyptian theology and establish the foundation for pharaonic legitimacy that would endure for thousands of years. The syncretism that merged Ra with Horus into the composite deity Ra-Horakhty represented more than a simple combination of divine attributes. This fusion created a new theological concept that embodied both the life-giving power of the sun and the earthly authority of legitimate kingship. Ra-Horakhty appeared as a falcon-headed man whose solar disk crown blazed with the combined radiance of both deities, while his wings could span the entire horizon when fully extended. The composite god's eyes held the golden fire of the sun itself, capable of seeing across vast distances and penetrating deceptions that might fool lesser beings. The transformation into Ra-Horakhty occurred most commonly during the crucial hours of dawn and dusk, when the sun's position on the horizon created natural conditions for the merger of solar and royal symbolism. During these transitions, Ra's human form gradually acquired falcon characteristics while retaining his essential solar nature. His neck elongated and his face projected forward into the distinctive beak shape that marked all falcon deities, while his arms developed the bone structure necessary to support the massive wings that would carry him across the sky. The wings themselves represented a marvel of divine engineering, their feathers constructed from crystallized sunlight that could support the god's weight while maintaining the flexibility necessary for flight. Each primary feather measured several cubits in length and glowed with internal fire that never dimmed, creating a spectacular display when Ra-Horakhty spread his wings against the sky. The wing membranes stretched between feathers consisted of woven air currents that had been solidified through divine will, providing lift and maneuverability that exceeded anything possible through natural aerodynamics. Ra-Horakhty's flight patterns followed precise mathematical relationships that corresponded to the movement of celestial bodies and the flow of cosmic energy throughout creation. His ascent from the eastern horizon each morning traced a spiral path that gradually straightened into the familiar arc across the sky, while his descent toward the west followed curves that prepared the earth for the approaching night. The god's wing beats created atmospheric disturbances that influenced weather patterns across Egypt, bringing beneficial winds during the growing season and moderating temperatures during the hottest months. The theological significance of this solar royal fusion extended far beyond its practical benefits for maintaining cosmic order. Ra-Horakhty embodied the principle that legitimate earthly authority derived from celestial sources, establishing the divine right of kings that would become central to pharaonic ideology. Every pharaoh would claim descent from this composite deity, asserting that their right to rule came not from human achievement or political maneuvering, but from direct connection to the fundamental forces that sustained creation itself. This divine legitimization process required elaborate rituals that demonstrated the pharaoh's connection to Ra-Horakhty and confirmed their worthiness to serve as the god's earthly representative. The coronation ceremonies included symbolic flights where the new king wore falcon wings and performed movements that mimicked the solar journey across the sky. These rituals occurred at dawn, when Ra-Horakhty's power reached its peak and the connection between solar and royal authority was most clearly visible to human observers. The establishment of Ra-Horakhty as the supreme deity of kingship coincided with the emergence of one of Egyptian mythology's most significant conflicts, the cosmic battle between Horus and Set that would define the eternal struggle between order and chaos. This conflict originated in the complex family relationships within the Aeneid, where Set's violent nature and jealous disposition created tensions that threatened the stability of divine society. The murder of Osiris by his brother Set had established a blood feud that could only be resolved through direct combat between the forces of legitimate authority and chaotic rebellion. Horus of Edfu, a manifestation of the falcon god specifically associated with this cosmic conflict, emerged as the primary champion of divine order against Set's chaotic influence. This version of Horus appeared larger and more militant than his other manifestations, his falcon form enhanced with armour-like feathers that gleamed with metallic lustre and eyes that burned with the righteous fury of one sworn to avenge injustice. His talons, sharpened to supernatural keenness, could rend both physical matter and spiritual essence, making him uniquely qualified to battle enemies who existed partially outside normal reality. The campaign against Set's followers throughout Egypt took the form of a systematic military operation that combined divine power with strategic planning. Horus of Edfu's forces included not only celestial warriors, but also human allies who had proven their loyalty to the principles of Ma'at. These mortal soldiers received divine blessings that enhanced their courage and fighting ability, while their weapons were consecrated in temple ceremonies that imbued them with supernatural effectiveness against chaotic entities. The conflict began in Upper Egypt, where Set's influence had traditionally been strongest due to the region's association with the desert and its harsh, unpredictable conditions. Horus of Edfu established his headquarters at Edfu itself, where a great temple would later commemorate his victories and serve as a centre for the worship of divine kingship. From this base, he launched a series of carefully planned attacks against Set's strongholds, each one designed to eliminate specific aspects of chaotic influence while preserving the underlying structure of creation. The battles that followed combined conventional military tactics with supernatural warfare techniques that operated according to divine rather than mortal principles. Horus of Edfu's strategy emphasized mobility and precision, using his ability to fly at tremendous speeds to strike at enemy positions before Set's forces could organize effective defenses. His attacks targeted the leadership structures that coordinated chaotic activities, disrupting Set's ability to maintain organized resistance while avoiding the widespread destruction that might damage innocent populations. Set's response to this campaign revealed both his cunning intelligence and his fundamental commitment to chaos as a governing principle. Rather than meeting Horus in direct battle, the red-eyed god employed guerrilla tactics that maximize confusion and unpredictability while minimizing his exposure to Horus's superior aerial capabilities. Set's followers included not only divine beings who shared his chaotic nature, but also mortal humans who had been corrupted by contact with primordial disorder. These corrupted humans appeared normal to casual observation but possessed supernatural abilities that made them formidable opponents for conventional forces. Their strength exceeded natural human limits. Their endurance allowed them to fight for days without rest, and their resistance to pain made them nearly impossible to stop through ordinary combat techniques. Most disturbing of all, their minds had been altered by chaotic influence, to the point where they no longer distinguished between friend and enemy, attacking anyone who approached them with equal ferocity. The corruption process that created these chaotic warriors involved prolonged exposure to Set's influence through rituals that gradually replaced normal, human consciousness with fragments of primordial disorder. The affected individuals retained their memories and personalities but lost their ability to make moral distinctions or maintain consistent goals over time. They became living embodiments of chaos, capable of tremendous destruction but incapable of the sustained cooperation necessary for constructive achievement. Horus of Edfu's campaign against these corrupted forces required the development of new combat techniques that could neutralize chaotic abilities without causing unnecessary suffering to the humans who had been victimized by Set's influence. The falcon god's solution involved the creation of the winged sun disk. a powerful symbol that combined his own aerial authority with Ra's solar power to create a weapon specifically designed to purify rather than destroy chaotic corruption. The winged sun disk manifested as a circular symbol of golden light flanked by outstretched falcon wings that could span the entire sky when fully extended. The disk's surface blazed with concentrated solar energy that burned away chaotic influence while leaving normal matter and consciousness unharmed. The wings provided both mobility and protective power, creating barriers that shielded allies from chaotic attacks while allowing purifying light to reach its intended targets. When deployed in battle, the winged sun disk appeared above the battlefield as a manifestation of divine authority that could be seen for miles in all directions. Its light penetrated supernatural concealment and illusions, revealing Set's hidden forces and exposing their true nature to both divine and mortal observers. The disk's presence on the battlefield had profound psychological effects, inspiring Horus's followers with confidence while demoralizing chaotic forces who recognized the symbol of their inevitable defeat. The purification process that the winged sun disk performed on corrupted humans required precise calibration to remove chaotic influence without damaging the underlying personality and memories. The disk's light operated according to principles of sympathetic resonance, identifying and neutralizing only those elements of consciousness that had been altered by contact with primordial chaos. The purified individuals retained their memories of serving Set, but regained their ability to make moral choices and distinguish between constructive and destructive actions. This restoration process proved crucial to the long-term success of Horus's campaign, as it prevented the creation of a permanent class of enemies who could never be reintegrated into ordered society. Instead of destroying Set's corrupted followers, Horus transformed them into witnesses to the power of divine order and potential allies in the ongoing struggle against chaos. Many of these restored individuals became devoted servants of Ma'at, their personal experience with corruption making them particularly effective at recognizing and countering chaotic influence. The systematic nature of Horus's campaign reflected the strategic thinking that Ra-Horakhty brought to the conflict between order and chaos. Rather than engaging in random battles or responding reactively to Set's provocations, the composite deity developed a comprehensive plan that addressed both the immediate military threat and the underlying theological issues that had enabled chaos to gain influence in the first place. This approach required patience and careful coordination between divine and mortal forces, but it ultimately proved more effective than previous attempts to contain Set's disruptive activities. The establishment of fortified positions throughout Egypt served multiple purposes in Horus's campaign against chaotic forces. These strongholds provided secure bases for military operations, while also serving as centres for the worship of divine order and the education of local populations about the principles of Ma'at. Each fortress included a temple dedicated to Ra-Horakhty, where priests conducted daily rituals that reinforced the connection between solar power and legitimate authority. The architectural design of these fortresses reflected both practical military considerations and theological symbolism. Their walls were oriented according to cardinal directions that corresponded to the daily solar journey, while their gates faced east to welcome Ra's morning light. The central courtyards contained altars where offerings could be made to Ra-Horakhty, while underground chambers provided secure storage for sacred texts and ritual implements that might be needed during extended sieges. The priests who staffed these fortress temples received specialized training in both religious duties and military tactics, making them capable of defending their positions against both conventional attacks and supernatural assaults. Their knowledge included protective spells that could strengthen walls against chaotic influence, healing techniques that could treat wounds inflicted by supernatural weapons, and communication methods that allowed coordination between distant fortresses, even when normal messenger services were disrupted. As Horus's campaign progressed through Middle and Lower Egypt, The conflict took on increasingly cosmic dimensions that transcended mere military operations. Each victory against Set's forces strengthened the principle of divine order, while each defeat risked allowing chaos to gain permanent footholds in creation. The battles became tests of fundamental theological principles, with the outcome determining whether the universe would continue to operate according to rational laws or descend into the arbitrary unpredictability that characterized primordial chaos. The involvement of mortal pharaohs in this cosmic conflict established the pattern that would define Egyptian kingship for thousands of years. Each ruler became a living representative of Horus in his eternal struggle against Set, responsible for maintaining Ma'at within their earthly domain, while contributing to the larger divine mission of preserving cosmic order. This responsibility extended beyond simple governance to include active participation in the theological drama that determined the fate of creation itself. The cosmic battles between order and chaos had established Ra's supreme authority over creation, but the sun god's most profound acts of creation emerged not from deliberate intention, but from his emotional responses to the beauty and complexity of the world he'd brought into existence. As Ra surveyed his handiwork from the solar bark during his daily journey across the heavens, tears of joy and satisfaction welled in his divine eyes. These were not tears of sorrow or pain, but crystalline droplets that contained the concentrated essence of divine emotion, each one pulsing with the creative power that had transformed the primordial waters of none into an ordered universe. When these tears fell from Ra's eyes to strike the earth below, they underwent immediate transformation upon contact with the fertile soil that had been enriched by countless cycles of Nile floods. The divine moisture, charged with Ra's creative essence, penetrated deep into the ground, where it encountered the fundamental elements that would serve as the raw materials for an entirely new form of existence. Unlike the gods who had emerged through deliberate acts of divine will, or the natural features that had formed through cosmic processes, these tear-born creations would possess a unique combination of divine spark and earthly substance. The first humans emerged from these sanctified patches of earth as fully formed adults, their bodies shaped by the same divine artistry that had created the gods themselves, but tempered by their terrestrial origins. Their skin bore the warm brown hues of Nile mud. The hair grew in the black waves that characterized the river's fertile deposits, and their eyes reflected the golden light of their solar creator, while maintaining the depth and complexity that would enable them to perceive both physical and spiritual realities. Their height matched that of the gods, though their frames carried the sturdy proportions necessary for physical labour and earthly survival. These primordial humans possessed capabilities that would seem miraculous to their later descendants. Their minds could comprehend divine speech without translation, allowing them to receive instruction directly from Ra and the other gods who walked among them during the Golden Age. Their bodies showed no signs of the aging process that would later limit mortal lifespans, maintaining perfect health and vitality through their natural alignment with the cosmic forces that sustained all creation. Their senses operated with supernatural acuity, enabling them to detect approaching weather changes, locate underground water sources, and identify the medicinal properties of plants through direct observation. Most remarkably, these first humans retained a portion of Ra's creative power, manifesting as an intuitive understanding of agriculture, architecture, and the arts that would form the foundation of Egyptian civilization. They could coax abundant harvests from previously barren soil, construct buildings whose proportions reflected divine mathematical relationships, and create works of art that captured spiritual truths in physical form. This creative ability operated through their direct connection to Ra's divine essence, channeled through the tears that had given them birth. The relationship between Ra's tears and human creation established a fundamental theological principle that would influence Egyptian religious thought for millennia. Humans were neither accidents of natural processes nor products of divine experimentation, but rather the spontaneous expressions of divine joy made manifest in physical form. This origin story explained both humanity's special relationship with the gods and their unique position as beings who combined celestial awareness with terrestrial existence. However, Ra's bodily emanations produced other forms of life through different processes that reflected various aspects of his divine nature. When the sun god perspired during the intense heat of midday, his divine sweat carried different creative properties than his tears. These droplets, charged with the active energy required for maintaining cosmic order, gave birth to lesser deities whose function supported the complex operations of the divine hierarchy. Unlike the major gods of the Aeneid who had emerged through deliberate acts of procreation, these sweat-born deities possessed more specialized roles and limited spheres of authority. The gods created from Ra's perspiration included the various protective spirits who guarded specific locations, the minor deities who oversaw particular crafts and professions, and the supernatural beings who served as intermediaries between the major gods and mortal humans. Their forms reflected their specialized functions. Craftsman deities bore the muscular builds and calloused hands of skilled artisans. Agricultural spirits possessed the lean frames and sun-darkened skin of experienced farmers, and protective entities displayed the alert postures and keen eyes of professional guardians. These lesser deities established their domains throughout Egypt, creating a network of divine presence that extended Ra's authority into every aspect of mortal existence. Village shrines housed local protective spirits who watched over community wells and granaries, while workshop altars honoured craft deities who guided the hands of potters, weavers, and metal workers. The proliferation of these minor gods created a religious landscape where divine influence touched every activity and location, reinforcing the connection between celestial order and earthly prosperity. Ra's breath produced yet another category of supernatural beings known as Kas, spiritual doubles that accompanied every living creature throughout their existence. When the sun god exhaled during his daily journey, his divine breath carried particles of concentrated life force that attached themselves to newborn humans and animals, creating invisible companions that shared their host's experiences while maintaining independent spiritual existence. These Kayas served multiple functions as guardians, guides, and repositories of spiritual energy that would sustain their host throughout life and beyond death. The Ka relationship operated according to principles of sympathetic connection that linked the spiritual double to its physical counterpart through bonds that transcended normal spatial limitations. When a person travelled, their Ka accompanied them, providing protection against spiritual threats and guidance in making important decisions. When they slept, their Ka remained alert, monitoring the surrounding environment for dangers that might threaten the vulnerable physical form. During times of illness or injury, the Ka channeled healing energy from the divine realm to support the body's natural recovery processes. The creation of Kayas established the theological foundation for Egyptian beliefs about death and afterlife that would become central to their religious practices. Since the Ka maintained independent existence separate from the physical body, death represented not the termination of existence, but merely the separation of spiritual and material components that had been temporarily united during earthly life. The Ka continued to exist after physical death, requiring sustenance and care from living relatives who maintained tomb offerings and performed memorial rituals. This understanding of spiritual doubles influenced Egyptian burial practices and tomb construction in fundamental ways. Tombs were designed as eternal homes for the Ka, equipped with everything necessary for comfortable existence in the afterlife. Wall paintings depicted the deceased enjoying various activities, providing visual sustenance for the Ka's continued existence. Grave goods included food offerings, clothing, tools, and luxury items that the Ka might need or desire during its post-mortem existence. The relationship between Ra's creative emanations and the natural world extended beyond the production of conscious beings to encompass the generation of sacred animals that served as living manifestations of divine power. The ibis, with its curved beak and distinctive black and white plumage, emerged from tears that Ra shed while contemplating the beauty of written language and recorded knowledge. These birds possess supernatural intelligence that enabled them to understand hieroglyphic writing and serve as messengers between the divine and mortal realms. Sacred ibises established their primary nesting grounds near major temples and scribal schools, where their presence blessed scholarly activities and ensured the accuracy of important documents. Their behaviour patterns reflected their divine origins. They could predict weather changes with uncanny precision, locate lost objects through supernatural senses, and identify individuals who possessed exceptional intellectual gifts. Scribes and priests observed ibis flocks carefully, interpreting their movements as divine communications about matters requiring scholarly attention. The falcon, Ra's most prominent animal manifestation, originated from the sun god's breath during moments of particular satisfaction with the cosmic order he'd established. These birds inherited Ra's keen vision and aerial mastery, enabling them to soar at tremendous heights while maintaining perfect awareness of terrestrial activities far below. Their hunting skills reflected divine precision, striking their prey with accuracy that seemed to transcend natural limitations, while maintaining the balance necessary to prevent overpopulation of their food sources. Sacred falcons received special protection throughout Egypt, with severe penalties imposed on anyone who harmed these divine representatives. Their nesting sites became centres of worship where priests conducted daily rituals honouring Ra's solar authority and earthly kingship. The birds' behaviour provided omens that guided royal decisions and military campaigns, their flight patterns interpreted as divine communications about the proper timing for important undertakings. The scarab beetle, symbol of Ra's morning transformation as Khepri, emerged from divine perspiration that fell to earth during the sun god's efforts to push the solar disk above the eastern horizon each dawn. These insects inherited the industrious nature that characterized Ra's daily labours, spending their lives rolling balls of dung across the desert landscape in perfect imitation of their creator's cosmic journey. Their activities served practical purposes by recycling organic waste and aerating soil, while their symbolic significance made them powerful protective amulets. Scarab beetles displayed remarkable navigational abilities that enabled them to maintain straight courses across seemingly featureless terrain, suggesting divine guidance that connected them to the cosmic forces governing celestial movement. Their life cycle, which included apparent death and resurrection as they emerged from underground pupation, made them perfect symbols of rebirth and renewal that would become central to Egyptian funerary practices. The creation of these sacred animals established a network of divine presence throughout the natural world that reinforced the connection between cosmic order and earthly phenomena. Every creature that bore special relationship to Ra served as a living reminder of divine authority and a potential channel for supernatural communication. This theological framework encouraged respectful treatment of the natural world while providing practical guidance for agricultural and pastoral activities. The annual flooding of the Nile, though more commonly associated with Isis weeping for her murdered husband Osiris, also carried connections to Ra's emotional responses to the cyclical nature of existence. When the sun god observed the seasonal death and renewal that characterized the natural world, his tears of mixed joy and sorrow contributed to the life-giving waters that transformed Egypt from desert wasteland into fertile paradise. These divine tears, charged with both creative power and regenerative energy, enhanced the flood water's ability to deposit nutrient-rich silt across the agricultural lands. The timing of the Nile's annual flood corresponded precisely to the heliacal rising of Sirius, the star associated with Isis, creating a complex theological relationship between solar authority and stellar influence. Ra's tears, falling during the period when his daily journey carried him through the constellation associated with the goddess, merged with her grief to produce the combined divine moisture that sustained Egyptian agriculture. This celestial coordination demonstrated the interconnected nature of divine powers and their cooperative efforts to maintain cosmic harmony. The flood waters carried more than mere physical nutrients to the agricultural fields. They transported the spiritual essence contained in divine tears, infusing the soil with creative power that enhanced crop yields far beyond what natural processes alone could produce. Farmers who worked land blessed by these sacred floods reported extraordinary harvests, with grain stalks growing taller and stronger than normal, while producing seeds of exceptional size and nutritional value. The religious calendar that governed Egyptian agricultural practices reflected this divine origin of the Nile's fertility. Planting ceremonies included rituals that honoured both Ra's creative tears and Isis's regenerative sorrow, acknowledging the dual divine sources that made abundant harvests possible. Harvest festivals celebrated not merely human labour and natural processes, but the ongoing divine benevolence that sustained Egyptian prosperity through the annual miracle of the flood. The establishment of agricultural cycles tied to Ra's seasonal journey created a religious framework that integrated practical farming knowledge with theological understanding. Farmers learned to time their activities according to the sun god's daily and annual movements, planting crops when solar energy reached optimal levels for germination and harvesting, when divine influence favoured the preservation of grain for storage. This system produced agricultural practices that maximised productivity while maintaining spiritual alignment with cosmic forces. The solar calendar that emerged from these agricultural observations became one of Egypt's most significant contributions to human civilization. By tracking Ra's movement through the heavens with mathematical precision, Egyptian astronomers developed a 365-day year that provided accurate predictions of seasonal changes and flood timing. This calendar system enabled long-term planning for agricultural activities, religious festivals, and administrative functions that required coordination across the entire kingdom. The religious significance of this solar calendar extended far beyond its practical applications. Each day represented a stage in Ra's eternal journey, with specific rituals and observances that honoured the sun god's daily labours while reinforcing human participation in cosmic processes. The calendar's mathematical precision reflected divine order made manifest in human understanding, demonstrating that mortal intelligence could comprehend and cooperate with celestial harmony. Temple schools throughout Egypt taught the complex calculations required to maintain calendar accuracy, training priests in astronomical observation and mathematical analysis that rivaled the knowledge of the gods themselves. These educational institutions preserved and transmitted the scientific knowledge that supported Egyptian agriculture, while maintaining the religious context that gave meaning to technical procedures. The integration of divine creativity, natural processes, and human activity that characterized Ra's tear-born creation established patterns that would influence Egyptian civilization throughout its long history. The understanding that divine emotions could manifest as physical phenomena encouraged respectful attention to natural signs and seasonal changes, while the recognition that human beings carried divine essence within their earthly forms supported concepts of personal dignity and spiritual potential that distinguished Egyptian culture from surrounding civilizations. The transformation of mortal rulers into living gods required more than simple political appointment or military conquest. The theological framework that Ra had established through his tears of creation and his daily demonstration of cosmic authority provided the foundation for a revolutionary concept: earthly kingship as divine manifestation. The pharaohs who would rule Egypt for millennia understood their position not as mere human administrators, but as direct extensions of Ra's solar power, chosen vessels through which the sun god could exercise authority over the terrestrial realm, while maintaining his primary responsibility for cosmic order. This divine appointment process began during the earliest dynasties, when local chieftains and regional governors demonstrated exceptional ability to maintain ma'at within their territories. Ra observed these mortal leaders from his solar bark, noting which individuals possessed the natural wisdom and moral strength necessary to serve as his earthly representatives. The sun god's selection criteria extended beyond simple administrative competence to encompass spiritual qualities that would enable effective communication between divine and mortal realms. The chosen rulers underwent a gradual transformation that prepared them for their divine responsibilities. This process began with dreams and visions, in which Ra appeared to communicate directly with the future pharaoh, revealing cosmic secrets and divine intentions that would guide their reign. These supernatural encounters occurred during the vulnerable hours just before dawn, when the barrier between mortal consciousness and divine awareness became most permeable. The chosen individual would awaken with knowledge they had never learned and understanding of principles they had never studied. Physical changes accompanied these spiritual revelations as the future pharaoh's body adapted to contain a portion of Ra's divine essence. Their eyes developed the golden flecks that marked those touched by solar power, while their skin acquired the subtle luminescence that distinguished divine representatives from ordinary mortals. Their voices gained the resonant authority that commanded immediate attention and respect, while their bearing reflected the confident dignity of one who had gazed upon cosmic truth and survived the experience. The coronation rituals that formally transformed these chosen mortals into living gods represented the culmination of theological development that had evolved over centuries of divine-human interaction. These ceremonies occurred at dawn on carefully calculated dates, when astronomical conditions created optimal alignment between solar power and earthly authority. The timing required precise coordination between temple astronomers who tracked Ra's celestial movements and priests who understood the ritual procedures necessary to channel divine energy safely through mortal forms. The coronation site itself embodied the connection between heaven and earth that defined pharaonic authority. The ceremony took place atop specially constructed platforms that elevated the participants above the surrounding landscape while maintaining direct contact with the sacred soil of Egypt. These platforms, built from blocks of limestone quarried from sites blessed by Ra's direct attention, incorporated mathematical proportions that reflected the harmonic relationships governing celestial mechanics. Their surfaces bore hieroglyphic inscriptions that recorded the fundamental laws of cosmic order and the specific obligations that divine kingship entailed. The ritual transformation began before sunrise, as the future pharaoh underwent purification procedures that prepared their mortal form to receive divine essence. Sacred oils extracted from plants that grew in temple gardens were applied to their skin in patterns that corresponded to the constellation maps carved on temple ceilings. These oils, blessed through months of ritual preparation, carried the concentrated spiritual energy necessary to facilitate the merger between human consciousness and divine authority. The application process required several hours of careful work by specially trained priests who understood the precise sequence and placement necessary for effective divine channeling. The pharaoh's ritual costume incorporated elements that symbolized their connection to Ra's various manifestations throughout the daily solar cycle. The white crown of Upper Egypt, crafted from silver that had been purified in temple fires and shaped according to measurements derived from solar observations, represented Ra's morning emergence as Khepri. Its conical form echoed the Benben stone from which the sun god had first emerged, while its gleaming surface reflected the dawn light that announced each new day's beginning. The red crown of Lower Egypt, forged from copper that had been mined from sites where Ra's tears had fallen to earth, symbolized the sun god's midday power when his authority reached its peak intensity. Its curved design mimicked the solar disk's apparent path across the sky, while its red coloration matched the intense heat that Ra generated during his strongest manifestation. When worn together as the double crown, these royal headpieces created a visual representation of Ra's complete authority over both the celestial and terrestrial realms. The crook and flail that became the pharaoh's primary symbols of authority originated from implements that Ra himself had used during his direct rule over creation during the Golden Age. The crook, carved from wood taken from the original tree that had grown from the primordial mound, retained the power to guide and protect those under divine authority. Its curved shape enabled the pharaoh to gather scattered subjects under unified rule, just as Ra gathered the scattered elements of creation into coherent cosmic order. The flail, constructed from precious metals and stones that had been charged with solar energy through prolonged exposure to Ra's direct radiance, embodied the disciplinary power necessary to maintain Ma'at among populations that might otherwise succumb to chaotic impulses. Its segmented design allowed for measured application of corrective force, while its golden construction ensured that punishment served constructive rather than merely destructive purposes. The climactic moment of the coronation ceremony occurred precisely at sunrise when Ra's solar bark appeared above the eastern horizon. As the first rays of sunlight struck the coronation platform, the assembled priests began the invocation that would summon Ra's divine essence to inhabit the prepared mortal form. This invocation, composed in the sacred language that had been used for divine communication since the creation of the world, required perfect pronunciation and timing to achieve the desired spiritual transformation. The words themselves carried power that transcended their semantic meaning, their syllables vibrating at frequencies that resonated with the fundamental forces governing creation. As the priest spoke these ancient formulae, the air around the coronation platform began to shimmer with released energy, while the limestone blocks beneath their feet grew warm with absorbed solar power. The future pharaoh, standing at the centre of this growing vortex of divine energy, felt their consciousness expanding to encompass awareness that extended far beyond normal mortal limitations. The actual moment of divine merger occurred when Ra's morning light, concentrated through specially designed mirrors and lenses, struck the pharaoh's prepared form with focused intensity. This concentrated solar energy, guided by the ritual preparations and channeled through the consecrated regalia, penetrated the mortal body to establish permanent connection with Ra's divine essence. The transformation was both instantaneous and gradual. The pharaoh immediately gained access to divine knowledge and authority, while their full adaptation to these new capabilities would continue throughout their reign. The newly crowned pharaoh's first official act involved the recitation of the royal names that would define their divine identity throughout their rule. These names, revealed through direct communication with Ra during the coronation process, incorporated elements that connected the new ruler to specific aspects of solar authority and cosmic responsibility. The throne name typically included references to Ra's creative power, while the birth name might incorporate symbols of the sun god's daily journey or seasonal cycles. The pronunciation of these royal names for the first time created ripples of divine energy that spread throughout Egypt, announcing the successful completion of the coronation ritual and the establishment of new divine authority over the land. Temple priests throughout the kingdom felt these spiritual vibrations and began the synchronized ceremonies that would align local religious practices with the new pharaoh's divine mandate. The Nile itself responded to the presence of renewed divine kingship, its flow adjusting to support the agricultural cycles that would sustain the population under their new ruler. The construction of pyramids represented the most visible manifestation of the pharaoh's divine connection to Ra's solar power. These monumental structures served multiple functions as eternal homes for the pharaoh's Ka, focusing devices for cosmic energy and physical demonstrations of divine authority that could be seen across vast distances. The pyramid's triangular faces mimicked the rays of sunlight that streamed from Ra's solar disk, while their precise mathematical proportions reflected the harmonic relationships that governed celestial mechanics. The Great Pyramid of Khufu exemplified the sophisticated understanding of solar geometry that guided these construction projects. Its base dimensions, when multiplied by specific mathematical constants, yielded measurements that corresponded to the Earth's circumference and the distance between Earth and Sun. These relationships were not coincidental, but reflected the pyramid builder's access to cosmic knowledge that Ra had revealed to his earthly representatives. The structure's internal chambers aligned with specific stars and constellations that marked important points in the solar calendar, creating a three-dimensional map of celestial relationships. The pyramid's construction required coordination between thousands of workers whose efforts were synchronized according to astronomical observations and religious calendars. The massive limestone blocks, some weighing several tons, were quarried from sites that had been blessed through elaborate rituals invoking Ra's creative power. The cutting and shaping of these blocks followed procedures that incorporated both practical engineering techniques and spiritual practices designed to imbue the stone with divine energy. The transportation of pyramid blocks from quarry sites to construction locations involved elaborate ceremonies that honoured Ra's daily journey across the sky. The blocks moved along carefully planned routes that corresponded to the sun god's path from east to west, with rest stops positioned at locations where Ra's solar bark traditionally paused during its celestial voyage. These transportation rituals transformed practical construction logistics into religious observances that reinforced the pyramid's sacred purpose. The pyramid's internal design reflected sophisticated understanding of the pharaoh's spiritual journey after death and their continued connection to Ra's divine authority. The ascending passages that led from the entrance to the burial chamber symbolized the soul's ascent to join Ra in his solar bark, while the precise angles of these corridors corresponded to the apparent path of specific stars that served as celestial guides for the deceased ruler's spiritual journey. The burial chamber itself, positioned at the pyramid's heart, served as a focusing device for cosmic energy that would sustain the pharaoh's ka throughout eternity. The chamber's dimensions incorporated mathematical relationships that resonated with the frequencies generated by celestial bodies in their orbital motions, creating a harmonious environment where the deceased ruler's spiritual essence could maintain connection with the divine realm. The granite sarcophagus, carved from stone that had been exposed to Ra's direct radiance for months before shaping, provided a vessel that could contain divine energy while protecting the pharaoh's mummified remains from decay. Sun temples represented another crucial element in the pharaoh's demonstration of divine connection to Ra's solar authority. Unlike the enclosed spaces that characterized most Egyptian religious architecture, sun temples featured open courtyards that provided direct access to sunlight throughout the day. These courtyards contained obelisks, whose pointed tips were designed to capture and concentrate solar energy, while their polished surfaces reflected Ra's light in patterns that created spectacular visual displays during religious ceremonies. The obelisks themselves embodied the connection between earthly authority and celestial power that defined pharaonic rule. Their monolithic construction from single pieces of granite demonstrated the pharaoh's ability to command resources and coordinate complex engineering projects, while their hieroglyphic inscriptions recorded the ruler's divine titles and accomplishments. The obelisk's pyramidal cap, often covered with electrum that gleamed like captured sunlight, served as a beacon that announced the pharaoh's divine status to observers throughout the surrounding region. The daily temple rituals that maintained the pharaoh's connection to Ra's divine authority required the ruler's personal participation in ceremonies that began before dawn and continued throughout the day. These rituals followed ancient procedures that had been established during Ra's direct rule over creation, their every detail prescribed by religious texts that recorded divine commandments given to the earliest pharaohs. The pharaoh's role in these ceremonies extended beyond mere symbolic participation to encompass active channeling of divine energy that sustained cosmic order. The morning ritual began in the temple's inner sanctuary, where the pharaoh approached the sacred statue that housed Ra's divine essence during the god's nightly journey through the Underworld. This statue, carved from black granite that had been blessed through years of ritual preparation, served as a temporary vessel for Ra's consciousness, while the sun god's primary attention focused on navigating the dangers of the Duat. The pharaoh's morning duties involved awakening this divine presence and preparing it for the day's activities. The awakening ceremony required the pharaoh to recite specific incantations while performing ritual actions that corresponded to Ra's daily transformation from Atum back into Khepri. These incantations, spoken in the sacred language that had been used for divine communication since creation began, carried power that could penetrate the barrier between the mortal realm and the divine consciousness that inhabited the statue. The pharaoh's words served as a bridge that enabled Ra's awareness to flow from the underworld back into the terrestrial temple. The ritual cleansing of Ra's statue involved the application of sacred oils and perfumes that had been prepared according to formulae revealed during the earliest divine human communications. These substances, derived from plants that grew in temple gardens blessed by Ra's direct attention, carried spiritual properties that purified the statue while preparing it to receive the full intensity of divine presence. The pharaoh's personal application of these cleansing materials demonstrated their intimate relationship with the divine power they served. The offering ceremonies that followed the cleansing involved the presentation of food, drink and luxury items that sustained Ra's divine essence during its temporary residence in the temple statue. These offerings included the finest bread baked from grain grown in fields blessed by the annual flood, wine fermented from grapes cultivated in vineyards that received optimal solar exposure, and incense burned from resins that had been harvested according to astronomical calculations that maximized their spiritual potency. The pharaoh's personal consumption of portions of these offerings created a direct connection between their mortal form and the divine essence that had blessed the food through its presence in the temple. This communion enabled the ruler to maintain their divine nature while inhabiting a physical body that required earthly sustenance. The shared meal between pharaoh and god reinforced the theological principle that divine authority could manifest through mortal vessels without compromising its essential nature. The midday ceremonies involved the pharaoh's participation in rituals that honoured Ra's transformation into his full solar aspect as the sun reached its zenith. These rituals took place in the temple's open courtyards, where the pharaoh could stand in direct sunlight, while performing the prescribed actions that demonstrated their alignment with cosmic order. The intense heat and brilliant light that characterized these midday observances tested the pharaoh's physical endurance, while providing opportunities for direct communication with Ra's consciousness. The evening rituals prepared Ra's temple presence for the nightly journey through the underworld, while ensuring the continuity of divine authority during the sun, God's absence from the terrestrial realm. The pharaoh's role in these ceremonies involved transferring their own divine essence into the temple statue, creating a reservoir of solar power that could sustain religious activities throughout the night. This transfer required the pharaoh to enter a trance state that enabled their consciousness to merge temporarily with Ra's divine awareness. The evening rituals that concluded each day's divine ceremonies established more than mere religious routine. They embodied the fundamental principle that would define Egyptian civilization's understanding of existence itself. As the pharaoh completed the transfer of divine essence into Ra's temple statue, the sun god's consciousness prepared for its nightly journey through the Duat, carrying with it the accumulated experiences and observations of the day's earthly activities. This daily cycle of death and rebirth, played out on both cosmic and terrestrial scales, provided the philosophical framework that would guide Egyptian thought about life, death, and the eternal continuation of consciousness beyond physical existence. The theological implications of Ra's eternal cycle extended far beyond simple solar worship to encompass a comprehensive worldview that addressed humanity's most fundamental questions about the nature of existence. Each dawn represented not merely the return of light after darkness, but the triumph of order over chaos, consciousness over oblivion, and purposeful existence over meaningless void. The sun's daily journey demonstrated that death was not final termination but transformation, that apparent endings were actually transitions to new forms of existence, and that the fundamental forces of creation possessed the power to overcome any obstacle that threatened their continuation. This cyclical understanding of existence provided comfort and meaning to mortals who faced the inevitable reality of physical death. The observation that Ra died each evening only to be reborn each morning offered concrete evidence that consciousness could survive the dissolution of its physical vessel. The sun god's nightly journey through the underworld, fraught with dangers and challenges that tested his divine power, demonstrated that the transition from life to death involved active participation rather than passive submission to natural forces. The integration of Ra worship with other major religious traditions throughout Egypt reflected the sun god's supreme position in the theological hierarchy, while accommodating local variations that had developed over centuries of regional religious practice. The fusion of Ra with Amun, the hidden god of Thebes, created Amun-Ra, a composite deity that combined solar authority with the mysterious power of the unseen divine presence that pervaded all creation. This theological merger occurred during the Middle Kingdom, when Theban political dominance required the incorporation of local religious traditions into the broader framework of Egyptian theology. Amun-Ra embodied the paradox of divine visibility and invisibility that characterized Egyptian understanding of supreme godhead. As Ra, the deity manifested in the obvious splendor of the sun's daily journey, providing visible evidence of divine power that no rational observer could deny. As Amun, the same divine essence operated through hidden channels that influenced events without revealing the mechanisms of divine intervention. This dual nature enabled worshippers to approach the supreme deity through both spectacular public ceremonies that celebrated solar authority and intimate private rituals that sought guidance from the unseen divine presence. The theological synthesis that created Amun-Ra required careful coordination between the established priesthoods of both deities, each bringing centuries of religious tradition and accumulated theological insight to the merger process. The priests of Ra contributed their sophisticated understanding of solar cycles, astronomical calculations, and the mathematical relationships that governed cosmic order. The priests of Amun offered their knowledge of hidden divine operations, mystical practices, and the subtle influences that shaped human consciousness without obvious external manifestation. The combined worship of Amun-Ra necessitated the construction of temple complexes that could accommodate both solar and hidden aspects of divine authority. The Great Temple at Karnak exemplified this architectural challenge, its massive hyper-style halls providing enclosed spaces for mysterious rituals, while its open courtyards enabled direct solar worship during daylight hours. The temple's orientation aligned with specific astronomical phenomena that marked important points in Ra's annual journey, while its internal chambers incorporated acoustic properties that enhanced the mystical experiences associated with Amun's hidden presence. The integration of Ra with Ptah, the creator god of Memphis, produced another significant theological synthesis that emphasized the connection between divine consciousness and material creation. Ptah-Ra embodied the principle that thought and speech possessed the power to transform spiritual concepts into physical reality, demonstrating how Ra's creative authority operated through intellectual processes rather than mere displays of raw power. This composite deity appealed particularly to craftsmen, architects, and artists whose work required the transformation of mental concepts into tangible objects. The worship of Ptah-Ra influenced Egyptian artistic traditions by establishing divine patronage for creative activities that combined technical skill with spiritual insight. Temple workshops that produced religious art and ceremonial objects operated under the protection of this composite deity, their craftsmen understanding their work as participation in the ongoing process of divine creation. The mathematical precision required for architectural projects, the symbolic complexity incorporated into religious paintings, and the technical expertise demonstrated in metalworking and jewellery production all reflected the influence of Ptah's creative authority. The synthesis of Ra with Khnum, the ram-headed god who shaped human beings on his potter's wheel, created a theological framework that addressed questions about individual human destiny and divine providence. Khnum-Ra combined solar authority with the intimate divine attention that shaped each person's unique characteristics and life circumstances. This composite deity provided theological justification for the Egyptian belief that individual human lives followed patterns established by divine will while maintaining sufficient flexibility to accommodate personal choices and moral development. The worship of Khnum-Ra influenced Egyptian understanding of personal responsibility and divine judgment by establishing the principle that individual actions carried cosmic significance. Each person's behaviour contributed either to the maintenance of Ma'at or to the advancement of chaotic forces that threatened universal order. This theological framework encouraged ethical conduct not merely as social convention, but as active participation in the fundamental struggle between order and chaos that defined existence itself. The solar hymns that preserved Ra's myths and theological significance represented some of the most sophisticated religious literature produced by ancient civilizations. These texts, composed by temple priests who possessed both poetic skill and profound theological understanding, captured the emotional and intellectual responses that Ra's divine authority inspired in human consciousness. The great hymn to Aten, though composed during the Amarna period, when solar worship temporarily displaced traditional Egyptian religion, demonstrated the continuing power of Ra's theological legacy to inspire religious innovation and artistic expression. The pyramid texts, carved into the burial chambers of Old Kingdom pharaohs, contain some of the earliest preserved references to Ra's creative activities and cosmic authority. These hieroglyphic inscriptions, designed to guide the deceased ruler's spiritual journey through the afterlife, incorporated detailed descriptions of Ra's nightly passage through the Duat and the challenges that awaited souls seeking to join the sun god's eternal journey. The text's combination of practical guidance and theological speculation provided a comprehensive manual for navigating the transition from mortal existence to divine participation in cosmic order. The coffin texts, which democratized access to the afterlife knowledge previously reserved for pharaohs, expanded the theological framework established in the pyramid texts while making Ra's protection available to broader segments of Egyptian society. These texts, inscribed on the wooden coffins of middle-class Egyptians during the Middle Kingdom, demonstrated the evolution of Egyptian religious thought from exclusive royal prerogatives to more inclusive spiritual opportunities. The expansion of Ra's protective authority to encompass ordinary mortals reflected the theological principle that divine benevolence operated according to moral merit rather than social status. The Book of the Dead, the most comprehensive collection of funerary texts produced by Egyptian civilization, culminated the development of Ra-centered afterlife theology, while incorporating religious insights that had accumulated over millennia of spiritual practice. These papyrus scrolls, customized for individual purchasers and placed in their tombs to provide guidance during the afterlife journey, contained spells, prayers, and instructions that enabled the deceased to navigate the underworld's dangers while seeking admission to Ra's solar bark. The theological sophistication demonstrated in these religious texts reflected centuries of priestly scholarship that had analysed every aspect of Ra's nature and authority. The text's detailed descriptions of divine appearances, cosmic geography, and spiritual processes provided comprehensive theological education for both priests and laypeople who sought to understand their relationship with divine authority. The preservation of these texts in multiple copies ensured the transmission of Ra's theological legacy across generations and cultural changes that might otherwise have disrupted religious continuity. The enduring influence of Ra's symbolism in Egyptian art and architecture created a visual vocabulary that communicated theological concepts through forms and proportions that could be understood by both literate and illiterate populations. The solar disk that crowned divine and royal figures in Egyptian art served as an immediate identifier of celestial authority, while the rays that extended from this disk demonstrated the active distribution of divine power throughout creation. The consistent use of these symbols across centuries of artistic production created a unified visual culture that reinforced religious teachings through constant exposure to theological imagery. The architectural incorporation of solar symbolism reached its pinnacle in the temple complexes that served as centres for Ra's worship throughout Egypt. The massive pylons that mark temple entrances were designed to frame the rising sun at specific times of year, creating dramatic visual effects that demonstrated the connection between human architectural achievement and cosmic order. The obelisks that stood before these temples served as giant sundials whose shadows marked the passage of time, while their pyramidal caps caught and reflected the sun's rays in displays of concentrated solar energy. The royal regalia that expressed pharaonic authority drew its symbolic power directly from Ra's theological significance, creating a visual language of divine kingship that could be understood throughout the Mediterranean world. The double crown that combined the white crown of Upper Egypt with the red crown of Lower Egypt represented the pharaoh's role as Ra's earthly representative, ruling over the unified kingdom that reflected cosmic order. The Uraeus serpent that adorned the royal crown embodied the protective power that Ra extended to his chosen representatives, its raised head ready to strike down any enemies who threatened divine authority. The crook and flail that served as the primary symbols of pharaonic power originated from implements that Ra had used during his direct rule over creation, their continued use by mortal rulers demonstrating the unbroken continuity of divine authority from the Golden Age to contemporary times. The crook's curved shape enabled the gathering of scattered subjects under unified rule, while the flail's segmented construction allowed for measured application of corrective force when subjects strayed from the path of Ma'at. The golden jewellery and ceremonial objects that accompanied pharaonic burials reflected the solar symbolism that defined Egyptian royal ideology, while demonstrating the technical expertise that divine patronage had inspired in Egyptian craftsmen. The golden death mask of Tutankhamun exemplified this tradition, its perfect proportions and exquisite craftsmanship, creating a portrait that combined realistic human features with the idealized perfection associated with divine authority. The mask's golden surface captured and reflected light in patterns that suggested the solar radiance that defined Ra's essential nature. The influence of Ra's theological legacy extended beyond Egypt's borders to affect religious developments throughout the ancient Mediterranean world. The solar worship that characterized the Amarna period influenced religious thought in neighboring kingdoms, while Egyptian solar symbolism appeared in the art and architecture of cultures that maintained diplomatic or commercial relationships with pharaonic Egypt. The concept of divine kingship that Ra's theology had established provided a model for royal legitimacy that was adopted by rulers throughout the ancient Near East. The preservation of Ra's religious traditions through the Ptolemaic period and into the Roman era demonstrated the enduring appeal of solar theology even as political circumstances changed dramatically. The identification of Ra with Helios and later with Sol Invictus showed how Egyptian solar worship could adapt to new cultural contexts while maintaining its essential theological insights. The mystery religions that flourished during the late Roman period incorporated elements of Ra's death and resurrection cycle, demonstrating the continuing relevance of Egyptian religious thought to populations seeking meaning and spiritual guidance. The rediscovery of Egyptian religion during the Renaissance and its continuing influence on Western esoteric traditions reflected the timeless appeal of Ra's theological framework for understanding the relationship between consciousness and cosmic order. The solar symbolism that pervaded Egyptian art and architecture provided inspiration for artistic movements that sought to capture spiritual truths in visual form, while the mathematical precision that characterized Egyptian temple construction influenced architectural theories that emphasized harmonic proportions and cosmic relationships. Ra's eternal cycle of death and rebirth established a theological framework that addressed humanity's deepest concerns about the meaning of existence and the possibility of consciousness surviving physical death. The daily demonstration of solar renewal provided concrete evidence that apparent endings could be transformed into new beginnings, that the forces of order possessed the power to overcome chaos, and that divine consciousness operated according to principles that transcended the limitations of mortal understanding. This legacy continues to inspire religious and philosophical thought, offering hope and meaning to those who seek to understand their place in the cosmic order that Ra first established when he emerged from the primordial waters of Nun to create the universe through his divine will and creative power. The sun god's influence on human civilization extended far beyond the boundaries of ancient Egypt, establishing patterns of thought and symbolic expression that would influence religious development throughout human history. Ra's demonstration that divine authority could manifest through natural phenomena while maintaining transcendent spiritual significance provided a model for understanding the relationship between the sacred and the material world that continues to inform religious thought across diverse cultural traditions. The eternal cycle that Ra embodied, creation, sustenance, death, and renewal, remains one of humanity's most powerful metaphors for understanding the fundamental rhythms that govern both individual existence and cosmic order, ensuring that the sun god's theological legacy will continue to illuminate human consciousness as long as the sun rises each dawn to bring light to the world.